The sun rose slowly over the 7 hills of Rome. The light was pale and orange. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling of his small apartment. The room was simple. It had a wooden bed, a small table, and one heavy chair. There were no decorations on the stone walls. Marcus liked it this way. After many years as a soldier in the Roman army, he preferred a quiet and clean life. He stood up and stretched his tired muscles. His body was strong, but he had many scars from old battles. He poured some water from a clay jar into a stone bowl. The water was cold, and it helped him wake up. He washed his face and put on his clean linen tunic. He tied his leather sandals tightly around his ankles. On the table sat a small piece of hard bread and a few olives. This was his breakfast every day. Marcus walked to the window and looked down at the street. His apartment was in a busy part of the city. Usually, the morning was full of life. He liked to hear the merchants calling out to customers and the heavy wheels of carts on the stone roads. But this morning, something felt different. The air was heavy. The usual noises of the city were missing. He left his room and walked down the narrow stairs. When he reached the street, he noticed the people. They were walking quickly. They did not stop to talk to their neighbors. 2 men stood near a fountain, but they were whispering. When Marcus walked past them, they looked away. Their faces were pale and worried. Marcus walked toward the great market near the Forum. This was the heart of Rome. He saw the beautiful white marble of the temples and the tall statues of the gods. The sun was higher now, and the heat was starting to grow. He saw a group of city guards near a large arch. They did not look relaxed. They held their spears with both hands and watched the crowd carefully. Marcus stopped at a stall to buy an apple. The merchant was an old man named Tiber. Usually, Tiber had a joke or a story to tell. Today, his hands were shaking as he took Marcus's coin. "Is everything okay, Tiber?" Marcus asked in a low voice. Tiber looked around the market. He leaned closer to Marcus. "There are rumors, Marcus. Bad rumors from the hill. They say a great man has fallen. The gods are angry." Marcus looked up at the Palatine Hill, where the wealthy senators and the emperor lived. The white villas looked peaceful under the blue sky. But Marcus knew better. He had spent his life in the army. He knew that silence was often more dangerous than a shout. He finished his apple and felt a cold sensation in his chest. Rome was hiding a secret, and the day was only beginning. Marcus threw the core of his apple into a nearby bin. He turned to leave the market, but a man blocked his path. The man was tall and wore a high-quality white tunic. He looked tired, and his face was covered in sweat. Marcus recognized him. This was Servius, a senior servant from the house of Senator Quintus. Marcus had worked for the senator before, helping to protect his shipments of grain from thieves. "Marcus," Servius said. He was breathing heavily. "I have been looking for you everywhere. You must come with me immediately." Marcus looked at the man's eyes. They were wide with fear. "Slow down, Servius. Tell me what happened. Why are you so worried?" Servius leaned in close. His voice was a thin whisper. "It is the senator. He is dead. Marcus. We found him this morning in his private study. The doors were locked from the inside. But he is cold. The mistress is in a state of shock." Marcus felt a sudden weight in his stomach. Senator Quintus was a powerful man, but he was also a fair one. He was one of the few men in Rome whom Marcus respected. Dead? How? Was he sick? No. Servius replied, shaking his head. He was fine last night. He ate a large dinner and went to his room to read. Now, the house is full of guards and confusion. The mistress asked for you. She says she only trusts you to find the truth. Marcus nodded. Take me there." They left the market and began the long walk up the Palatine Hill. This was where the richest people in Rome lived. The streets here were wider and cleaner than in the rest of the city. Huge villas made of white marble and expensive stone lined the road. Beautiful gardens with tall trees and colorful flowers smelled sweet in the morning heat. However, the beauty did not make Marcus feel better. He knew that behind these beautiful walls, people often hid dark secrets. When they reached the villa of Quintus, Marcus saw two soldiers at the entrance. They were members of the city guard. They held their long spears across the door to stop people from entering. Servius spoke to them, and they let Marcus pass. Inside the villa, the air was cool and smelled of incense. The floors were covered in beautiful mosaics that showed scenes of old battles. Usually, the house was full of the sound of servants working. Today, it was silent. A few servants stood in the corners of the large hall. They were not working. They were watching the door to the senator's private room. "Wait here," Servius said. "I will tell the mistress you have arrived." Marcus stood in the center of the hall. He looked at the high ceiling. He was an investigator now, not a soldier. He started to look for things that were out of place. He noticed a small smudge of dry mud on the expensive floor. It was near the door to the garden. It was a small detail, but Marcus remembered it. In a mystery, the smallest details were often the most important. Servius returned and nodded to Marcus. Marcus followed him down a long, quiet hallway. They stopped in front of a heavy oak door. Two guards stood there. Their faces were like stone. Inside the room, Marcus saw Livia, the senator's wife. She was sitting on a wooden chair. She did not cry, but her face was very white. She looked at Marcus and pointed at the body on the floor. "I cannot understand it," Livia said. Her voice was thin and weak. The door was locked from the inside. The servants had to use a heavy tool to break it to get inside. "My husband was alone. No one could enter." Marcus walked into the room. It was a study, a place for thinking and writing. There were many scrolls on the wooden shelves. A large desk sat in the middle of the room. The senator was lying on a colorful rug near the desk. He looked like he was sleeping. Marcus knelt down beside him. He touched the senator's hand. It was cold and stiff. Death had arrived many hours ago. Marcus looked at the door. It was a strong door. He looked at the iron bolt. To lock this door, a person had to be inside the room. He walked to the only window. The window was small and had thick iron bars. A small bird could fly through, but a man could not. Marcus looked at the floor and the walls. Everything was in its place. Not even a lamp was knocked over. Who found him first? Marcus asked. "I did," Livia said. "He did not come to breakfast. I knocked many times, but there was no answer. I called the guards because I was worried." Marcus returned to the body. He looked at the senator's face. There was no look of pain. There was no blood on his white toga. There were no signs of a fight. Marcus carefully turned the senator's head to the side. Under the jaw, on the left side of the neck, Marcus saw something strange. It was a small, dark mark. It was the color of a deep purple grape. It was not a bruise from a punch or a fall. It was a small, perfect circle. Marcus touched it with his finger. The skin there was slightly swollen and hard. He stood up and looked around the room again. He felt a chill. How did a killer enter a locked room, kill a man with a tiny mark, and leave without opening the door? This was not a natural death. This was a very clever murder. Did he have any visitors last night? Marcus asked Livia. Livia shook her head slowly. "No. He said he wanted to be alone. He told me he had to read some very important papers." Marcus looked at the desk. There were many scrolls in the room, but the top of the desk was empty. If the senator wanted to read, where were the papers? Marcus realized the killer had not only taken a life but also something written. Marcus watched Livia carefully. She was a beautiful woman, but her face was full of lines today. She held a small, wet cloth in her left hand to wipe her eyes. She looked like a grieving wife. But Marcus was a trained soldier. He knew how to look at people when they were under pressure. He noticed that she kept her right hand closed very tightly. It was resting on her lap, hidden under a fold of her expensive silk dress. "I am very sorry for your loss, Livia," Marcus said softly. He stepped closer to her. "The senator was a good man. I want to help you. To do that, I need you to tell me everything about last night." Livia looked up at him. Her eyes were red. "I have told you what I know, Marcus. He came here to work. He was fine. Then, this morning, he was gone." "Did he seem worried yesterday?" Marcus asked. "Did he say anything about the Golden Eagle or his work at the palace?" At the mention of the eagle, Livia's hand twitched. Her fingers tightened even more around whatever she was holding. "The eagle? Why do you ask about that?" "It is a holy object. It stays in the private temple of this house. It has nothing to do with my husband's heart stopping." Marcus did not answer her question immediately. He watched her right hand. "Livia, you are holding something. Your hand is shaking, and you are hiding it from me." Livia pulled her hand away and tucked it deeper into the folds of her dress. "It is nothing. I am just nervous. This is a very difficult time for a woman." Marcus shook his head. "In this room, nothing is nothing. If you are hiding something, it could be dangerous for you. The person who did this is still out there. If they think you have something they want, you are not safe in this villa." Livia looked toward the door. The guards were outside, but she still seemed afraid of the shadows in the room. She looked at Marcus for a long time. Finally, she slowly opened her right hand. Inside her palm was a heavy gold ring. It was not a woman's ring. It was a large man's ring with a dark red stone in the center. Marcus saw a symbol carved into the stone. It was a bird, but it was not a Roman eagle. It looked like a hawk with its wings spread wide. "Where did you find this?" Marcus asked, his voice very low. "It was on the floor," Livia whispered. "I found it near the desk when I first ran into the room this morning. It does not belong to my husband. He never wore such a thing. He hated large jewelry." "Why didn't you show this to the guards?" Marcus asked. Livia looked at the floor. "I was afraid. I recognize this symbol. It belongs to a man named Valerus. He and my husband were once friends, but then they became enemies. Valerus is a powerful man with many friends in the palace. If he knows I have this, he will come for me." Marcus took the ring from her. The gold was cold. "You were right to be afraid, Livia. But you cannot hide the truth. I will take this. I will find out why this ring was in a locked room with a dead man." Livia started to cry again. Marcus put the ring into a small leather pouch on his belt. He had his first real clue, but he knew it made his journey much more dangerous. Marcus left Livia in the study. He walked back into the main hall. He needed to find Cassius. Cassius was the senator's personal servant for many years. He knew the senator's habits better than anyone. He knew who the senator saw and what he ate. He found Cassius in a small, dark room near the kitchen. The room smelled like dried herbs and old wood. Cassius was sitting on a low stool. He was a man of middle age with gray hair and thin hands. He was cleaning a silver cup with a white cloth, but his movements were slow. When Marcus entered, Cassius did not look up. He kept his eyes on the cup. "Cassius," Marcus said gently, "I need to talk to you." The servant's hands stopped moving. He gripped the silver cup tightly. "I have nothing to say, Marcus. I am just a servant. I do my work. I do not ask questions." Marcus sat down on a wooden bench across from him. "The senator is dead, Cassius. He was your master, but I think he was also your friend. Don't you want to find out what happened?" Cassius finally looked up. His eyes were wide and full of a deep fear. His face was thin, and his skin looked yellow in the dim light. The senator was a good man, but Rome is a dangerous place for men like him, and it is more dangerous for men like me. "Tell me about last night," Marcus said. "Did you see anyone near his study? Did you hear anything unusual?" Cassius looked at the door to make sure no one was listening. He leaned forward. His voice was a very soft whisper. "I brought him his wine at sunset. He was sitting at his desk. He looked very tired. He told me to leave and to lock the door to the hallway. He said he did not want to be disturbed by anyone." "Anyone?" Marcus asked. "Did he mention a name? Did he mention Valerus?" At the name Valerus, Cassius started to shake. The silver cup fell from his hands and hit the stone floor. He did not pick it up. "Please, Marcus, do not say that name here. There are ears in the walls." The senator was worried. "He told me that if anything happened to him, I should run." "Why haven't you run yet?" Marcus asked. "I am afraid they are watching the gates," Cassius said. He looked at the floor again. "I saw a man last night. He was not a servant, and he was not a guard. He was standing in the shadows of the garden. He wore a dark cloak, but I saw something shiny under it. It looked like a golden bird." Marcus thought about the missing golden eagle. "Where did he go?" "I don't know," Cassius whispered. "I ran to my room and hid. I am a coward, Marcus. I did nothing." Marcus put a hand on the servant's shoulder. "You are alive, Cassius. That is not being a coward. That is being smart. But you must tell me if you see that man again." Cassius did not answer. He picked up the silver cup and began to clean it again, but his hands were still shaking. Marcus knew the servant was hiding more, but he could not force him to speak yet. Marcus walked back to the senator's study. The two guards were still standing outside the door. They looked at Marcus with tired eyes, but they stepped aside to let him pass. Marcus entered the room and closed the heavy door behind him. He wanted to be alone to think. The room felt cold now, even though the sun was shining outside. He stood in the center of the room and looked around. Something was still bothering him. The senator was a man of many words and many documents. He was a leader in the city. His desk should be covered in letters, reports, and lists. But the wooden surface was clean and polished. It was too perfect. Someone cleaned this room. Marcus whispered to himself. He began to search the room more carefully. He checked the wooden shelves. He looked behind the large scrolls of law and history. He found nothing. He moved to the corner of the room where a large, heavy rug lay on the floor. The rug was a beautiful object from a distant land in the east. It had complex patterns of red, blue, and gold. As Marcus walked across the rug, he felt a small bump under his leather sandal. He stopped. He moved his foot back and forth. There was definitely something under the heavy fabric. He knelt on the floor and gripped the edge of the rug. It was very heavy, and he had to use his strength to pull it back. Under the rug, lying flat against the cold stone floor, was a small piece of parchment. It was folded into a tiny, tight square. Marcus picked it up. His fingers felt the rough texture of the paper. He sat back on his heels and unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was fast and messy. It looked like the writer was in a great hurry or very nervous. The message was short. It said, "Tonight, when the moon is high, meet me near the temple of Saturn in the Forum. Do not bring your guards. Bring the golden eagle. If you do not come, the secret will be told to the emperor." There was no name at the bottom of the letter. There was no mark to show who sent it. Marcus read the words again. His mind raced. This letter was clearly for the senator. Did the senator read this before he died? Or did he die because of this letter? The golden eagle was mentioned again. Marcus knew this was the famous statue that belonged to the senator's family. It was a symbol of their history and their loyalty to Rome. If the statue was missing, and someone was using it to threaten the senator, the situation was much worse than a simple murder. Marcus looked at the locked door and then at the small window with the iron bars. He put the letter into his leather pouch, next to the heavy gold ring he took from Livia. He felt the weight of the two items against his side. He had a ring from an enemy and a letter from a stranger. He knew what he had to do. He could not stay in this house all day. He had to go to the Forum. He had to see who was waiting at the Temple of Saturn. But the sun was still high in the sky. He had many hours to wait before the moon was high. He decided to go to the market first. He wanted to see if anyone was talking about the senator's secret. Marcus left the quiet of the senator's villa and stepped back into the heat of the afternoon. The sun was very bright now. It reflected off the white marble buildings and made his eyes hurt. He walked down the hill and headed toward the Forum. This was the busiest part of Rome. The Forum was a place of noise and movement. Men in long togas stood in groups, talking about politics and the price of grain. Merchants shouted to attract customers to their stalls. There was the smell of roasted meat and heavy perfume in the air. Marcus moved through the crowd like a fish in water. He was a large man, and people usually moved out of his way. He reached the Temple of Saturn. It was a massive building with tall stone columns. Marcus looked at the spot where the meeting was supposed to happen tonight. Right now, it was just a place for people to rest in the shade. He looked for anything strange. He looked for anyone who seemed to be waiting. As he walked away from the temple, he felt a strange sensation. It was a feeling he remembered from the war. It was the feeling of eyes on his back. He did not turn around immediately. He stopped at a small stall to look at some leather belts. He used the polished surface of a bronze bowl to look at the crowd behind him. He saw many people. There were women carrying baskets and men arguing about coins. But then he saw a man in a simple brown cloak. The man was standing near a large statue. He was not looking at the statues or the shops. He was looking directly at Marcus. When Marcus moved his head, the man quickly turned away and started to look at a piece of fruit. Marcus felt his heart beat a little faster. He started to walk again. He moved faster this time. He turned into a narrow street that led away from the main square. The street was dark and smelled of old water. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him. They were the quick, light sounds of someone trying to be quiet. Marcus did not run. He walked to the end of the street and turned another corner. Then, he quickly stepped into the shadow of a deep doorway. He held his breath. He pressed his back against the cold stone wall. He waited. The footsteps came closer. A shadow appeared on the ground at the corner of the street. Marcus prepared his hands. If this was a killer, he was ready to fight. But the footsteps stopped just before the corner. There was a long silence. Marcus waited for a minute, then two. When he finally looked around the corner, the street was empty. The man in the brown cloak was gone. Marcus touched the leather pouch on his belt. The letter and the ring were still there. Someone wanted those items. Or perhaps they wanted him. He realized he could not go back to his apartment. He was being hunted in his own city. Marcus moved quickly. He entered a very narrow street. In Rome, these small streets are called alleys. The walls were made of old, red brick. Above him, people hung wet clothes to dry on long ropes. Small drops of water fell from the clothes onto the stone floor. It was very dark in the alley because the buildings were very tall. The bright sun of the afternoon could not reach the ground here. He stopped in the middle of the alley. He did not move. He listened carefully. Behind him, the light footsteps stopped too. Marcus turned around slowly. At the entrance of the alley, a tall figure stood against the bright light of the main street. The man looked like a dark shadow. He wore a long cloak with a large hood. The hood covered his face completely. "I know you are there," Marcus said. His voice was loud and steady. "You have been following me since the forum. Come into the light. Show me your face." The man did not answer. He began to walk toward Marcus. His steps were slow and heavy. He did not look like a common thief. Thieves in Rome usually moved fast and tried to hide in the crowd. This man walked with confidence. He moved like a soldier. Marcus reached for the small dagger in his belt. He felt the cold iron handle. He did not pull it out yet, but he was ready to fight. He remembered the words of his old captain in the army. "Always watch the hands," the captain said. "Hands hold the weapons." The man in the cloak was now very close. He was a tall man, almost a head taller than Marcus. He stopped moving. The air between the two men was very tense. Marcus could hear the man's slow, calm breathing. "Did Valerus send you?" Marcus asked. "Or are you working for the people who took the Golden Eagle?" The stranger moved his right hand toward the front of his cloak. Marcus shifted his weight and prepared to strike. He pulled his dagger from his belt. The metal blade was sharp and gray in the dim light. "I do not want to hurt you," Marcus said, "but I will defend myself." The man in the cloak stopped. He stayed very still for a moment. Then, he spoke. His voice was deep and very familiar. "You were always too quick to draw your sword, Marcus," the man said. The stranger slowly reached for his hood. Marcus did not put his dagger away. He watched the man's every move. The man pulled the hood back, and a face appeared in the shadows. Marcus felt his heart jump. He recognized the man. It was someone he had not seen for many years. Marcus stared at the face in front of him. He slowly lowered his dagger. The man was Lucius. They had served together in the Roman army many years ago. They had shared many cold nights and difficult battles in the northern lands. Lucius looked older now. He had a deep scar on his left cheek, and his hair was almost entirely white. He wore the leather armor of a city officer, but it looked worn and dusty. "Lucius," Marcus said. He put his dagger back into his belt. He felt a wave of relief, but he was still confused. "You nearly lost your head. Why were you following me like a thief in the shadows?" Lucius stepped closer. He reached out and gripped Marcus's arm in a traditional soldier's greeting. His hand was strong and calloused. "I am sorry, Marcus. I did not want to scare you, but the streets of Rome are full of eyes today. I had to see if you were still the same man I knew in Gaul. I had to see if you still looked over your shoulder." Marcus looked at his old friend. "What are you doing here? Why are the guards so nervous today? The market is like a graveyard." Lucius looked at the entrance of the alley to make sure they were still alone. He spoke in a very low voice. "The senator's death is not a secret anymore, Marcus. The news is spreading like fire. The palace knows. The emperor's own guards, the Praetorians, are moving through the city. They are not looking for a killer. They are looking for someone to blame so they can close the case quickly. The senator was murdered, Lucius. Marcus said firmly. I was in the room. I saw a mark on his neck. It was a small, purple circle. I have never seen anything like it. Lucius turned pale. He grabbed Marcus's tunic and pulled him deeper into the darkness of the alley. Hush! Do not speak of that mark in the open air. That is the sign of the night shadow. It is a rare poison from the east. It is very expensive and very hard to find. Only very powerful people in the palace have access to such things. Marcus realized the danger was much bigger than he thought. Is the emperor in danger? Everyone is in danger. Lucius replied. The golden eagle is missing. It is more than a statue, Marcus. It is a symbol of the city's strength. If the people find out it is gone, they will think the gods have left Rome. There will be a riot in the streets. My captain told me to stay away from the senator's house. He said it is a palace matter now. I cannot stay away. Marcus said. He touched the leather pouch on his belt. I found a letter. Someone wants to meet the senator at the Temple of Saturn tonight when the moon is high. They want the eagle. Lucius looked even more afraid. Then you are walking into a trap, my friend. The palace guards are already watching the temples. They are waiting for anyone who looks suspicious. If they see you there, they will not ask questions. They will simply use their swords. Please, Marcus, go back to your apartment. Stay inside and lock your door. Marcus shook his head. I was a soldier, Lucius. I do not run from a fight. I have to find out who killed the senator. Lucius sighed. You were always the most stubborn man in the legion. Be careful, Marcus. Rome is a city made of stone, but today, it feels like it is made of blood. Marcus left Lucius in the dark alley and walked back toward the Palatine Hill. The sun was sitting low in the sky now, casting long, thin shadows across the stone streets. The warning from his old friend stayed in his mind. The night shadow poison was a tool for professional killers. This was not a simple crime of anger. It was a planned execution. He reached the senator's villa as the sky began to turn a deep red. The guards at the front gate were tired. They did not look at Marcus closely as he walked past. Inside the house, the air felt even heavier than before. The servants were moving in silence, like ghosts in the hallways. Marcus did not go back to the study. Instead, he remembered what Livia had said about the private temple. In every great Roman house, there was a special place for the family gods. He found a room at the end of a long corridor. The door was made of heavy bronze and stood slightly open. Marcus entered the temple. It was a beautiful, small room. The walls were painted with bright pictures of the gods and the stars. Small lamps burned with a sweet-smelling oil, filling the air with a soft, yellow light. In the center of the room stood a tall pedestal made of white marble. Marcus walked to the pedestal and stopped. His heart sank. The top of the marble base was empty. Usually, the golden eagle of Jupiter sat there. It was a famous statue, made of solid gold and decorated with small jewels for eyes. It was the pride of the senator's family and a gift from an old emperor. Now, there was nothing but a thin layer of dust. Marcus knelt down to look at the top of the pedestal. He saw several deep scratches in the stone. It looked like the statue had been pulled away with great force. He also noticed something else. On the floor, near the base of the pedestal, there was a single, small feather. It was not a real feather from a bird. It was made of thin, beaten gold. It had broken off the statue during the theft. Marcus picked up the gold feather. It was light and very sharp. He realized the truth. The letter he found under the rug asked the senator to bring the golden eagle to the meeting. But the eagle was already gone. Perhaps the senator did not have it to give. Perhaps he was killed because he could not provide the item the killers wanted. He stood up and looked around the silent temple. The missing statue was more than just wealth. In Rome, symbols were everything. If the golden eagle was in the hands of the senator's enemies, they held a powerful weapon against his family name. Marcus put the gold feather into his leather pouch. He now had a ring, a letter, and a piece of the missing eagle. The moon would be high in the sky soon. He had to prepare for the meeting at the Temple of Saturn. He knew he was walking into a trap, but he was the only one who could find the truth. Marcus left the senator's house and walked toward the district of the merchants. The sky was now dark, and the moon was starting to rise. He did not go to the forum yet. He had a small, gold feather in his pouch, and he needed to talk to an expert. He knew a man named Gaius. Gaius was a merchant who bought and sold gold from all over the world. If someone wanted to sell a famous statue, they would go to him. The shop of Gaius was in a narrow street near the Great Circus. It was a small building with thick stone walls and a heavy iron door. Marcus knocked on the door. After a moment, a small window in the door opened. A pair of dark eyes looked out at him. "We are closed." A voice said, "It is Marcus." Marcus replied, "I need to show you something, Gaius. It is about the senator's house." The door opened slowly. Gaius was a short man with a round face and many gold rings on his fingers. He looked nervous. He quickly pulled Marcus inside and locked the door with 3 different keys. The shop was full of beautiful things. There were golden plates, silver cups, and small statues of lions and horses. A single oil lamp sat on a wooden table, making long shadows on the walls. "You should not be here, Marcus," Gaius said. He wiped his forehead with a cloth. "There are bad stories in the market today. People are saying the senator was killed by a ghost in a locked room." "It was not a ghost," Marcus said. He reached into his pouch and pulled out the small gold feather. He placed it on the wooden table under the light of the lamp. "Look at this. Do you recognize the work?" Gaius picked up the feather with a pair of small metal tools. He held it close to the lamp. His face turned pale. His hands began to shake. "This is very old work," Gaius whispered. "This gold is pure. It comes from the mountains in the north. There is only one object in Rome made of this specific gold. It is the eagle of Jupiter. Has anyone asked you about it?" Marcus asked. He stepped closer to the merchant. "Has anyone come here to sell gold that looks like this?" Gaius looked at the heavy iron door and then back at Marcus. He swallowed hard. "A man came here yesterday. He did not have the statue, but he asked a lot of questions. He wanted to know if I could melt down a large gold object very quickly. He wanted to know if I could turn a statue into simple gold bars." "What did he look like?" Marcus asked. "He was a tall man," Gaius said in a low voice. "He wore a red cloak, but it was old and dirty. He had a scar across his nose. I told him I do not do such work, but he just laughed. He said the eagle would soon belong to a new master." Marcus felt a cold chill. The man in the red cloak was mentioned by the slave, Cassius, too. Did he say anything else? He said that Rome would change when the moon reached its highest point, Gaius said. He pushed the gold feather back toward Marcus. "Take it and leave, Marcus. I do not want any trouble. If the people who have that eagle find out I talk to you, I am a dead man." Marcus walked away from the merchant's shop. The streets were now very dark. Most people were inside their homes. Only the occasional barking of a dog or the distant sound of a guard's footsteps broke the silence. Marcus felt small in the middle of the great stone city. He kept his hand on his leather pouch. He felt like every shadow was a man in a red cloak. He decided to return to his apartment for a short time. He needed to gather his heavy wool cloak and a better sword. If he was going to the forum at midnight, he needed to be ready for a fight. He walked quickly through the narrow streets of his neighborhood. When he reached his building, he stopped. He looked up at his window. There was no light inside, but he noticed something strange. The wooden shutter of his window was swinging slowly in the wind. He always closed it tightly before leaving. Marcus climbed the stairs quietly. He did not use a lamp. He knew these stairs well. When he reached his door, he saw that the lock was broken. The wood around the iron latch was splintered. Someone had used a heavy tool to force the door open. He pulled his dagger from his belt and pushed the door with his foot. The room was a mess. His wooden bed was turned over. His small table was moved to the center of the room. His clothes were pulled out of his trunk and thrown across the floor. Someone had searched every corner of his home. Marcus walked into the middle of the room. He did not care about his clothes or his bed. He looked at the table. In the center of the wood, someone had placed an object. It was a dagger, but it was not a whole weapon. The blade was snapped in half. The metal was dark and rusted. Beside the broken dagger, there was a small mark drawn on the table with charcoal. It was the shape of a snake. Marcus felt a cold wave of fear. This was not the work of a common thief. A thief would take his coins and his silver cup. A thief would not leave a broken weapon and a symbol. They know where I live. Marcus whispered to himself. He realized that he was no longer just an investigator. He was a target. The people who killed the senator and took the golden eagle were watching him. They wanted him to see the broken dagger. It was a message. If you continue, you will be broken too. Marcus did not stay to clean the room. He grabbed his heavy cloak from the floor and put it on. He found his short sword under the overturned bed. He checked the edge of the blade with his thumb. It was sharp. He tied the sword belt around his waist. He could not stay here. It was no longer a safe place. He looked at the charcoal snake on his table one last time. Then, he blew out his small lamp and left the room. He headed back down the stairs and out into the night. The moon was climbing higher in the sky. It was almost time to go to the forum. Marcus walked through the dark streets. He did not go straight to the forum. The moon was high, but he still had a little time. He kept thinking about the senator's villa. He felt that he had missed something important there. The night shadow poison, the missing eagle, and the broken dagger in his room were all parts of a larger puzzle. He needed one more piece before the meeting. He arrived at the back wall of the senator's villa. This side of the house faced a quiet road with very few lamps. Marcus found a low part of the stone wall. He reached up, grabbed the cold stone, and pulled himself over. He landed quietly on the soft grass of the garden. The garden was a beautiful place, even in the dark. There were many tall trees and bushes. The air smelled like roses and wet earth. A small stone fountain sat in the middle of the grass. The water moved slowly, making a peaceful sound. Marcus stayed in the shadows of a large tree. He watched the house. There were no lights in the windows of the lower floor. He remembered what the servant, Cassius, had said. Cassius saw a man in the garden on the night of the murder. Marcus began to walk along the edge of the garden wall. He looked at the ground, but it was too dark to see footprints. He moved toward a corner of the garden where the plants were very thick. In this corner, there was a large wall of ivy. The green leaves covered the stone from the ground to the top. Marcus noticed that some of the leaves were torn. He reached out and touched the ivy. It felt loose. He pushed the thick plants aside with his hands. Behind the ivy, Marcus found something unexpected. There was a small wooden door built into the stone wall of the villa. It was very old and had no handle on the outside. It was a secret entrance. Marcus pushed the door. It did not move. He looked closer and saw a small iron keyhole hidden under a piece of loose wood. Marcus thought about the ring he found in Livia's hand. He took the heavy gold ring with the red stone out of his pouch. He looked at the shape of the ring. He tried to press the stone of the ring into the keyhole area. It did not fit. But then, he noticed a small metal lever near the bottom of the door. He pulled it. The door made a low, scraping sound as it opened a few inches. Marcus froze. He waited to see if any guards heard the noise. The garden remained silent. He pulled the door open further and stepped inside. Beyond the door was a narrow stone staircase. It went down into the ground. The air coming from the stairs was cold and smelled of old dust. Marcus realized this was not a way out of the villa, but a way under it. He pulled his cloak tight and began to walk down the stairs into the darkness. He was now under the senator's house, and he was sure he was close to the truth. Marcus did not go down the dark stairs. He realized he needed more information before he went into the tunnels under the villa. He carefully closed the secret door and covered it again with the thick ivy. He moved quietly back through the garden and entered the main house. He found Livia in a small sitting room. She was looking at a painting on the wall, but her eyes were empty. A single lamp burned on a table beside her. "Livia," Marcus said. He stepped into the light. She jumped slightly and turned to face him. "Marcus, you scared me. Why are you still here? The city guards told me to rest." Marcus took the gold ring with the red stone out of his pouch. He held it up so the lamplight hit the hawk symbol. "I found a secret door in your garden. Livia. It leads to a staircase under this house. This ring and that door are connected. I need the truth now. Who does this belong to?" Livia looked at the ring, then at Marcus. She looked like she wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. She sat down slowly on a cushioned bench. She covered her face with her hands for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were full of tears. "I am a bad wife, Marcus," she whispered. "My husband was a good man, but he was always working. He cared about Rome more than he cared about me. I was lonely in this big house." "Who is the man?" "Livia," Marcus asked firmly. "It belongs to Valerus," she said. The name came out as a tiny breath of air. "He is a high-ranking officer in the army. He visited me when my husband was at the Senate. He used the secret door in the garden so the servants would not see him." Marcus felt a cold anger. Valerus was the man Gaius the merchant had mentioned. He was the man with the red cloak. "Did Valerus kill your husband?" "No," Livia cried out. "He told me he loved me. He said he wanted us to be together. But lately, he changed. He started asking questions about the senator's papers. He wanted to know where the golden eagle was kept." "And you told him?" Marcus asked. Livia nodded slowly. "I didn't think it was a problem. It is just a statue. But then, 2 nights ago, Valerus became very angry. He said the senator was a stone in the road that needed to be moved. I was afraid. Marcus. I told him to leave and never come back. But he came back anyway." Marcus said. "He used his ring to enter the house. He killed the senator and took the eagle." Livia started to sob. "I didn't know he would do that. I thought he just wanted to be powerful. I am so sorry." Marcus looked at the ring. The red stone looked like a drop of blood in the light. He now knew the killer's name and his motive. Valerus wanted the eagle to gain power, and he killed the senator to get it. But Marcus still didn't know how Valerus got into a locked room or where he was hiding now. "Stay in this room," Marcus said. "Lock the door from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me or Lucius." He left her there and walked toward the front door. He had a name. and he had a destination. He had to find Valerus before the moon reached its highest point. Marcus walked quickly toward the baths of Titus. The moon was now a bright silver coin in the sky. The baths were a popular place for Romans to meet, talk, and relax. Even late at night, many people were there. The large building was made of fine stone and had many tall arches. Light from oil lamps glowed inside, creating long, yellow streaks on the wet ground. As Marcus entered, the heat hit him like a physical wall. The air was thick with steam and the smell of expensive oils. The sound of water falling from stone pipes filled the halls. He walked through the large rooms. The first room was cool, but as he moved deeper into the building, the air became hotter and wetter. In the steam room, it was very hard to see. The white mist was everywhere. Marcus held his hand near his sword. He looked for a man named Drusus. Drusus was a man who worked at the baths, cleaning the floors and carrying towels. He saw everything and heard everything. Marcus found a man sitting on a stone bench in a corner. The man was thin and wore only a simple cloth around his waist. He was sweating heavily. "Drusus," Marcus whispered. The man looked up. His eyes were red from the steam. "Marcus, I did not think you would come. It is dangerous for me to talk to you. The senator is dead." "Drusus," Marcus said. He sat down on the bench next to him. The stone was uncomfortably hot. "I know Valerus was involved. Did you see him here?" Drusus looked around the room. There were other men in the steam, but they were far away. Their voices were just low murmurs. "Valerus comes here often. But 2 nights ago, he was different. He did not come to bathe. He came to meet someone in the private rooms at the back." "Who did he meet?" Marcus asked. "I do not know the name," Drusus said, his voice shaking. The man wore a dark cloak. "They thought I was busy with the towels, but I heard them. They were talking about the golden eagle. Valerus said the bird was safe. He said the senator would not be a problem anymore." Marcus felt a cold anger in his chest. Did they say where they took it? Drusus leaned closer. The steam made his face look like a ghost. "They mentioned the river. They talked about a cart and a warehouse near the docks. Then, the man in the cloak gave Valerus a small glass bottle. It was very small, and the liquid inside was dark purple. The night shadow poison. Marcus knew it now. Valerus did not just steal the statue. He planned the murder with a partner. "Thank you, Drusus," Marcus said. He stood up to leave. "Be careful, Marcus," Drusus whispered as he disappeared back into the white mist. "Valerus has guards everywhere. He is not just an officer. He is a monster." Marcus left the steam room and walked out into the cool night air. He took a deep breath. He had a new lead. The docks near the river were a place of crime and shadows. If the Golden Eagle was in a warehouse there, he had to find it before it was melted down or moved out of the city. Marcus walked away from the baths. He felt the cold wind from the Tiber River on his face. The streets near the water were narrow and wet. He walked toward the river gate, a large stone archway that led to the docks. He saw an old guard standing by a small fire in a bronze bowl. The guard's name was Vetus. Vetus was an old soldier who knew Marcus from their days in the Legion. He was a man who saw everything but usually said very little. Marcus approached the fire. The orange light jumped across the old man's tired face. "Vetus," Marcus said quietly. The guard looked up. He didn't look surprised to see Marcus. "The city is full of ghosts tonight. Marcus, why are you walking so close to the water?" "I am looking for the truth, Vetus," Marcus replied. He warmed his hands over the fire for a moment. I am looking for a cart. A heavy one. It left the Palatine Hill late last night, after the moon was high. Vitus took a slow breath. He looked toward the dark river. I remember that cart. It was not a normal cart for grain or wine. The wooden wheels were pressing deep into the dirt because it was carrying something very heavy. It was covered with a thick, black cloth. No one could see what was inside. Did you see the driver? Marcus asked. He looked into Vitus's eyes. The driver was just a slave. Vitus said. He looked very afraid. But there was another man riding a horse next to the cart. He wore a fine red cloak. The wind blew his hood back for a second when he stopped to show me his papers. He had a long scar on his cheek. He did not look at me. He looked straight ahead, like a hunter. This confirmed Marcus's fears. Valerus was moving the golden eagle himself. Where did they go? Vitus. This is very important. Vitus pointed a shaking finger toward the docks. They went through this gate and headed toward the old warehouses near the big wooden crane. They did not have any lamps on the cart. They moved into the shadows as quickly as they could. I thought it was strange, but his papers had the seal of a high officer. I could not stop him. Marcus reached into his pouch and gave Vitus a silver coin. Thank you, my friend. You have helped me more than you know. Be careful, Marcus. Vitus warned. The docks are not safe at this hour. There are men there who kill for a single copper coin. A man in a red cloak is a man with power, and power is a dangerous thing in the dark. Marcus nodded and stepped away from the fire. He walked through the gate and toward the river. The sound of the water was a low, steady noise against the stone docks. He saw the tall, dark shapes of the warehouses. Somewhere inside one of them, the Golden Eagle was waiting. Marcus did not go to the docks immediately. He knew the warehouses were a dangerous maze at night. He needed to understand why a man as rich as Senator Quintus would be involved with a man like Valerus. He decided to return to the senator's villa one last time. He wanted to look at the financial records. In Rome, money often told the secrets that men tried to hide. The villa was quiet. Most of the oil lamps had burned out, leaving the halls in deep shadow. Marcus moved like a cat to the senator's private office. He did not use the main door. He entered through the garden again. Inside the office, the air smelled of old paper and dried ink. He found a large wooden chest in the corner of the room. It was locked with a heavy iron bolt. Marcus took a small metal tool from his belt. He had learned how to open locks during his years in the army. After a few moments, the lock opened. Inside the chest were many wooden tablets covered in wax. These were the senator's money books. Marcus sat on the floor and began to read. He used a small candle to see the words. At first, everything looked normal. There were records of grain sales and payments for wine. But then, Marcus found a hidden tablet at the very bottom of the chest. The handwriting on this tablet was different. It was not the clean work of a professional scribe. It was the senator's own hand. Marcus read the numbers and felt a cold shock. Senator Quintus, one of the richest men in the city, was deeply in debt. He owed a massive amount of gold, more gold than he actually owned. Marcus looked at the name of the person who lent the money. It was not a bank or another senator. The name written was the Snake. Beside the name, there was a small drawing of a snake eating an eagle. It was the same symbol Marcus had seen on the broken dagger in his apartment. The senator was not just a victim. Marcus whispered. He was a prisoner of his own debt. He realized the truth. The senator had used the Golden Eagle as a guarantee for the money. He had given the holy statue to this secret group to prove he would pay them back. But he could not pay. When Valerus and the Snake Group realized the money was gone, they decided to take the eagle and the senator's life. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Marcus quickly blew out his candle. He stayed very still, his hand on his sword. He heard the sound of a heavy footstep outside the door. Then, silence. Someone was standing right outside the room, listening. Marcus realized he was no longer the hunter. He was being hunted inside the very house he was trying to protect. He put the wooden tablet into his pouch and prepared to move. He had to get to the docks. But first, he had to get out of this room alive. Marcus stood in the dark office, holding his breath. The person outside the door did not move. Marcus slowly stood up and moved toward the window. He did not want to fight in a small room with only one door. He climbed out onto the garden grass and waited. A shadow moved near the kitchen. It was not a guard. The figure was short and moved with a limp. Marcus followed quietly. The person stopped near the back gate and looked around. It was Cassius, the servant. He was carrying a small cloth bag. He looked very afraid. "Cassius." Marcus whispered. The servant jumped and almost dropped his bag. He turned around, his eyes wide with terror. "Please, Marcus, do not hurt me. I am just leaving. I cannot stay here anymore." "Why are you running, Cassius?" Marcus asked. He stepped into the moonlight. "I know about the senator's debt. I know about the snake." Cassius started to cry. "Then you know why I must go. They came back tonight. They were in the garden. They told me that if I did not leave, I would be next. They are looking for the papers. Marcus. The money records. I have the records." Marcus said, "But I need to know where you were going. You were the senator's friend. He must have told you a safe place." Cassius shook his head. "He told me nothing. But I saw where the man in the red cloak went. He did not go to the main docks. He went to a small warehouse near the old wooden bridge. It is a place where they keep the broken boats." Marcus realized this was the same direction Vetus the guard had pointed. "Why that warehouse?" "It has a cellar," Cassius whispered. "A deep one that goes under the river. The senator used to go there to meet the men in the dark cloaks. He thought he could win his money back with games of chance. He was wrong." Cassius looked at the gate. "I must go now. If Valerus finds me, I am dead." "Go," Marcus said. "Get out of the city. Do not look back." Cassius disappeared into the night. Marcus stood alone in the garden. He now knew the exact location of the enemy. The warehouse near the bridge was a perfect hiding place. It was quiet, dark, and away from the main streets. He touched the heavy gold ring in his pouch. He had the ring, the records, and the location. The moon was reaching its highest point in the sky. It was time for Marcus to face the man in the red cloak. Marcus walked away from the senator's villa and headed toward the Subura. This was the most crowded and dangerous part of Rome. The buildings here were tall, old, and made of wood that often caught fire. The streets were so narrow that two people could barely walk side by side. Even at night, the air was thick with the smell of cheap wine, smoke, and waste. He pulled his dark cloak tightly around his shoulders. In the Subura, a man with a good tunic was a target for thieves. Marcus kept his hand on the handle of his sword. He saw groups of men standing around small fires in the middle of the road. They watched him with cold, hungry eyes. He did not look at them. He walked with the steady pace of a soldier who knew where he was going. He was looking for the warehouse Cassius had described. The path took him past the great stone walls of the temples and down into the lower parts of the city. Here, the ground was often muddy from the river. He heard the sound of a woman screaming in a high window, followed by a loud laugh. He did not stop. He had seen the horrors of war. The shadows of the city did not frighten him. As he turned a corner near an old bakery, he saw 3 men blocking the path. They were large men with dirty faces. One of them held a heavy wooden club. Another had a long, rusted knife. "You look lost, friend," the man with the club said. He had a yellow tooth and a mean smile. "This street has a price. Give us your pouch, and maybe you can keep your feet." Marcus stopped. He did not pull his sword yet. "I am not looking for trouble. I have a more important place to be. Step aside." The men laughed. They began to move closer, circling him like hungry dogs. The man with the knife stepped forward to grab Marcus's cloak. In one quick motion, Marcus moved. He did not use his sword. He hit the man in the face with his heavy leather glove. The man fell into the mud with a groan. Marcus looked at the other 2. His eyes were hard like flint. "I was a soldier in the 10th Legion. I have killed many men in the mud of the north. Do you want to be next?" The men looked at their friend on the ground. They looked at Marcus's strong shoulders and the way he held himself. They realized he was not a rich merchant to be robbed. He was a killer. They stepped back into the shadows and let him pass. Marcus continued his walk. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were steady. He finally reached the edge of the Subura. Ahead of him, he could see the dark, flowing water of the Tiber River. The warehouse was close. The river air was cold and damp. Marcus moved along the edge of the water, staying in the deep shadows of the stone walls. He finally saw it. The old warehouse. It was a tall, ugly building made of grey stone and rotting wood. It sat right on the edge of the river. Next to it, the old wooden bridge looked like a skeleton in the pale moonlight. Marcus saw a small light in a high window of the warehouse. He moved toward a side door. It was locked, but the wood was old and soft. He used his dagger to push the latch back. The door opened. Marcus stepped inside and waited for his eyes to adjust to the dark. The warehouse was full of broken things. There were piles of old ropes, cracked wine jars, and pieces of broken boats. The air smelled of salt and old fish. He heard the sound of small feet running across the floor. Rats. Marcus walked slowly, making sure he did not step on any loose wood. He heard a low voice coming from the back of the room. He followed the sound until he found a set of wooden stairs leading down into the ground. A yellow light was coming from below. Marcus knelt and looked through a gap in the floorboards. Below him was a large cellar. It was cleaner than the room above. A heavy wooden table stood in the center. Sitting at the table was Valerus. He still wore his red cloak, but it was dusty and stained. He was looking at a map and talking to a man in a dark hood. "The Emperor will be at the Forum tomorrow," Valerus said. His voice was cold and sharp. "The guards will be watching the crowd, not the rooftops. That is when we strike." "And the bird?" the hooded man asked. Valerus pointed to a corner of the cellar. A large object was covered with a blood-stained cloth. Marcus felt his heart jump. Even under the cloth, the shape of the golden eagle was clear. "The eagle stays here until the job is done," Valerus continued. "It is our symbol of victory. Once the emperor is dead, the people will see the eagle in my hands, and they will follow me." Marcus saw something else. On the table, next to the map, was the small glass bottle of purple poison. Valerus picked it up and looked at it. The senator was too weak to use this. He wanted to talk and wait. "But I am a man of action." Marcus realized the plan was much bigger than he thought. They were going to kill the emperor. He had to stop them. But there were 2 of them and only one of him. Just then, a loose piece of wood under Marcus's knee snapped. Below, Valerus stopped talking. He looked up at the ceiling. "Who is there?" he shouted. He pulled his sword from its scabbard. Marcus stood up quickly. He knew he could not hide anymore. He had to move fast. Marcus did not stay to fight. He was a soldier, and he knew when the odds were against him. He turned and ran through the dark warehouse, jumping over piles of old rope and broken jars. Behind him, he heard the heavy footsteps of Valerus and the hooded man. They were shouting for guards. Marcus reached the side door and burst out into the cold night air. He did not go back toward the Subura. Instead, he ran along the riverbank until he found a small, stone shed used by fishermen. He slipped inside and pressed his back against the wall. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Inside the shed, he heard a soft groan. Marcus pulled his dagger. "Who is there?" A small figure moved in the corner. It was Cassius, the servant. He was curled into a ball on a pile of old nets. His face was covered in dirt, and he was holding a piece of cloth to his leg. The cloth was soaked with blood. "Cassius, why didn't you leave the city?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside him. "I tried," Cassius whispered. His voice was very weak. "But they were waiting at the bridge. I saw the man in the red cloak. He recognized me. He struck me with his sword as I ran. I crawled here to hide." Marcus looked at the wound. It was deep, but not fatal. He took a clean strip of linen from his own tunic and wrapped it tightly around the servant's leg. "Listen to me, Cassius. I saw them. I saw the eagle. I saw Valerus. He is planning to kill the emperor tomorrow at the forum." Cassius gripped Marcus's arm with his thin fingers. "It is worse than that. Marcus, I was in the room that night. I was hiding in the senator's private closet." Marcus froze. "You saw the murder?" "Yes," Cassius said. Tears began to fall down his face. The senator was at his desk. He was crying because he knew he could not pay the debt. Suddenly, the man in the red cloak appeared. He did not come through the door. He came through a secret panel in the wall that leads to the garden. He held a small needle. He was very fast. He stabbed the senator in the neck, and then he just stood there and watched him die. He looked like he was enjoying it. "And the eagle?" "Valerus took it," Cassius said. "But he also took a list of all the other senators who owe money to the snake. He is going to use that list to control Rome." He told the hooded man that the emperor is just the first person to fall. Marcus felt a cold anger. This was not just a murder. It was a revolution built on blood and debt. He looked out the small window of the shed. The sun would be rising soon. "Stay here, Cassius," Marcus said. "I have to find Lucius. I have to stop them before they reach the forum." Marcus knew he could not save the emperor alone. He also knew he needed to understand the poison better. If the emperor was attacked with the same needle that killed the senator, Marcus needed to know if there was any way to stop it. He left Cassius in the safety of the shed and ran toward the house of a man named Dr. Galenus. Galenus was a Greek doctor who lived in a small house near the Great Library. He was a man of science who studied plants and medicines from all over the world. Marcus reached the wooden door and knocked loudly. He did not stop until an old man with a long white beard and a green tunic opened the door. "It is nearly morning, Marcus," Galenus said, rubbing his eyes. "Is someone dying?" "A senator is already dead, and the emperor might be next," Marcus said. He stepped inside the house. The walls were covered with shelves of small glass bottles and dried plants. The air smelled of vinegar and honey. Marcus described the purple mark on the senator's neck. He told the doctor about the small glass bottle of dark liquid he saw in the warehouse. Galenus's face became very serious. He walked to a large book made of heavy paper and began to turn the pages. The Night Shadow. Galenus whispered. It comes from a rare flower that grows in the high mountains of the east. It is a terrible poison. It does not kill with a blow. It stops the heart in a few seconds. The purple mark is where the blood dies under the skin. Is there a cure? Marcus asked. Galenus shook his head slowly. If the needle touches the skin, there is very little hope. But... He paused and reached for a small jar on a high shelf. There is a medicine that can slow the heart down. It is made from the bark of a specific tree. If a man takes this before the poison enters his body, he might survive. But it makes the man very sleepy. He would look like a walking ghost. Marcus took the small jar. The emperor cannot be a ghost tomorrow. He must lead the city. Is there any other way? The poison is a liquid. Galenus explained. It must enter the blood. If the emperor wears thick leather or light metal under his silk toga, the needle cannot reach his skin. The killer only has one chance. They will aim for the neck or the hands. Marcus thanked the doctor and put the jar in his pouch. He now had a plan for protection. But he still had to get close to the emperor. The sun was now touching the tops of the buildings. The day of the attack had arrived. Marcus left the doctor's house and headed for the barracks of the city guard. He had to find Lucius before the emperor reached the forum. The sun was a pale yellow light over the Tiber River. Marcus did not go straight to the barracks. He remembered the note about the meeting by the river. He wanted to see who else was involved in this dark plot. He walked quickly toward a quiet spot near the great stone bridge. The river was high, and the water moved fast, making a deep, rushing sound against the stone. Marcus hid behind a large pile of wooden crates. He waited. Soon, he saw a small boat coming down the river. There were 2 men in the boat. One man was rowing, and the other was standing at the front. The man standing wore a fine toga, but he had a dark cloak over his shoulders. The boat stopped at a small wooden dock. The man in the cloak stepped out. He looked around carefully. Then, another man walked out from under the bridge. It was the hooded man from the warehouse. "Is it done?" the man from the boat asked. His voice was cold and sounded like a person of high rank. "The eagle is safe," the hooded man replied. "And the bird of gold is ready for the morning. Valerus has the needle. The emperor will not leave the forum alive today." "Good," the man from the boat said. He reached into his belt and pulled out a heavy purse of coins. He threw it to the hooded man. The sound of gold hitting gold was sharp in the quiet morning. "Ensure the guards are looking at the crowd. My men will be on the rooftops near the Temple of Saturn." Marcus felt a cold shiver. This was not just Valerus. This was a group of powerful men. He watched the man from the boat. When the man turned his head, Marcus saw his face. It was Senator Falco, a man who always sat next to the emperor. Marcus realized the danger was much closer to the emperor than he thought. If Falco was part of the plot, the emperor's own friends were his killers. The hooded man looked at the purse of gold and laughed. It was a low, cruel sound. "Tell Valerus to be ready," Falco said. "Once the emperor falls, we will bring the golden eagle to the steps of the Senate. The people will think it is a sign from the gods that we should lead." The man from the boat stepped back into his vessel and began to row away. The hooded man disappeared back into the shadows under the bridge. Marcus stayed very still until the river was quiet again. He had heard enough. He had names, a plan, and a location. He had to reach Lucius now. If he was too late, the history of Rome would be written in the emperor's blood. He turned and ran toward the city guard barracks, his heart pounding like a drum. Marcus arrived at the barracks, but Lucius was not there. A young guard told him that Lucius was already at the forum to prepare for the emperor's visit. Marcus turned to leave, but a messenger in a clean, blue tunic stopped him at the gate. The messenger held a small scroll sealed with purple wax. "Are you Marcus, the investigator?" the messenger asked. "I am," Marcus replied, his eyes narrowing. "This is for you. It is from the house of Flavius," the messenger said. He handed the scroll to Marcus and quickly walked away. Marcus opened the scroll. Flavius was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He owned many lands outside the city walls. The letter was short. "Marcus, I know what you are looking for. Come to my villa on the Appian Way at noon. I have the missing piece of your puzzle. Do not tell the guards." Marcus looked at the sun. It was mid-morning. The Appian Way was a long road leading out of Rome, lined with the grand tombs and villas of the rich. He knew it could be a trap, but Flavius was a man who knew everyone's secrets. If he had information, Marcus could not ignore it. He walked out of the city gates. The Appian Way was busy with travelers and merchants. He passed the large stone tombs that stood like silent giants along the road. Finally, he reached the villa. It was a massive house with tall white columns and a beautiful garden. Two large statues of lions guarded the entrance. A servant led Marcus to a large dining room. The floor was made of black and white marble. Flavius was sitting on a long couch, eating grapes. He was a large man with a kind face, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Sit, Marcus," Flavius said, gesturing to a chair. "You look like a man who has not slept in days. Would you like some wine?" "I have no time for wine, Flavius," Marcus said. He stayed standing. "The emperor is in danger. You said you have a missing piece. Tell me what it is." Flavius smiled slowly. He set the grapes down. "You are very direct. I like that. The piece is this. Valerius is not the leader of this group. He is just a sword. The person who wants the emperor dead is much more powerful, and that person is waiting for you to fail." Marcus felt the tension in the room. "Why are you telling me this? Are you not one of them?" "I am a businessman, Marcus," Flavius replied. "Chaos is bad for business. If the emperor dies, the city will burn. I prefer peace. But I also know that Valerius has a list. If you get that list, you can stop the whole group, not just one man." Marcus looked at the rich man. He wasn't sure if he could trust him, but he had no other choice. "Where is the list?" "Valerius carries it in a small leather tube on his belt," Flavius said. "He never lets it go. If you want it, you will have to take it from his cold hand." Flavius stood up from his couch and walked toward a large wooden chest. He opened it and pulled out a heavy leather bag. The sound of many coins hitting each other was loud in the quiet room. He placed the bag on the marble table between them. "This is 5,000 gold pieces, Marcus," Flavius said. He looked into Marcus's eyes with a calm smile. "It is more money than a soldier earns in 10 lifetimes. It can buy you a beautiful villa in the south, far away from the noise and the blood of Rome. You could have a quiet life, with servants and the best wine." Marcus looked at the bag. The gold was tempting. He thought about his small, cold apartment and the scars on his body. He thought about the dangerous men in the shadows and the purple mark on the senator's neck. "What do I have to do for this gold?" Marcus asked. His voice was steady. "It is very simple," Flavius replied. He leaned closer. "Do not go to the forum today. Stay here. Have a meal. Rest. When the sun goes down, the city will have a new leader. You will be a rich man, and you will not have to fight anyone. Valerus and his friends will not bother you. I will personally ensure your safety." Marcus looked around the beautiful room. Everything was perfect and expensive. But then, he remembered the face of Senator Quintus. He remembered the fear in Livia's eyes and the blood on Cassius' leg. He remembered the golden eagle, a symbol of honor that was now being used as a tool for a murder. "You are a businessman, Flavius," Marcus said. "But I was a soldier. A soldier does not leave his post when the enemy is at the gate. My honor is not for sale." Flavius's smile disappeared. His face became cold and hard like stone. "Honor is a very expensive thing, Marcus. Many men die for it and are forgotten in a week. If you leave this house, you are choosing a path of blood. Valerus will not be as kind as I am." "I have seen blood before," Marcus said. He turned away from the gold. "And I am not afraid of Valerus." "Then you are a fool," Flavius said quietly. He signaled to a servant. "Show our guest to the door. He has a meeting with destiny." Marcus walked out of the villa and back onto the Appian Way. The sun was hot on his neck. He felt a sense of relief. He had made his choice. He had no gold, but he had his sword and his truth. He began to run toward the city. He had to reach the Forum before the Emperor arrived. Every second was precious now. The sun was high in the sky as Marcus ran back toward the city walls. The Appian Way was crowded with people, but he pushed through them. He could see the great stone gate of Rome in the distance. His mind was focused on the Forum and the Emperor. He did not notice the three men standing near a large, ancient tomb until it was too late. "Marcus, stop!" a voice shouted. Marcus looked to his left. Three men stepped out from behind the stone monument. They were not common thieves. They wore leather armor and carried long, sharp swords. These were professional soldiers. One of them was the tall man with the scar on his nose, the same man Gaius the merchant had described. "Valerus told us you were coming," the scarred man said. He raised his sword. The metal shone brightly in the sunlight. "He said you were a man who did not know when to stop. That is a very dangerous habit." Marcus pulled his own sword. The weight of the metal felt good in his hand. He looked at the three men. They were moving to surround him. On the Appian Way, people began to scream and run away. A merchant's cart stopped nearby, and the driver hid under the wooden seat. "I am going to the Forum," Marcus said. His voice was low and calm. "If you want to stop me, you will have to kill me here." "That is the plan," the scarred man replied. The first man attacked from the right. He swung his sword in a wide circle. Marcus blocked the blow with his own blade. The sound of metal hitting metal was sharp and loud. Marcus moved quickly. He used his shoulder to push the man back. Then, the second man lunged from the left. Marcus stepped to the side, and the sword missed his chest by an inch. He kicked the man's leg, sending him to the ground. But the scarred man was the leader for a reason. He was fast. He moved forward and slashed his sword across Marcus's arm. Marcus felt a sudden, hot pain. Blood began to soak into his sleeve. He did not stop. He knew that if he stopped, he would die. He ignored the pain and struck back. He hit the scarred man's sword with such force that the weapon flew out of the man's hand and hit a stone tomb. The other two men were back on their feet. Marcus was bleeding, and he was tired. He looked at the gate of Rome. It was so close, but these men were between him and the city. "You are good, soldier," the scarred man said, clutching his hand. "But you are one, and we are many." Just then, the sound of galloping horses filled the air. A group of riders in red cloaks was coming down the road. Marcus felt a moment of hope. Was it Lucius? Or was it more of Valerus's men? He gripped his sword tighter and prepared for the next wave of the fight. The sound of the horses grew louder, a rhythmic thunder against the stone of the Appian Way. The scarred man looked over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing. He expected reinforcements, but as the riders drew closer, the sun caught the glint of the official crest of the city cohorts. Marcus! A voice roared. It was Lucius. He led a small group of 5 guards, their horses kicking up dust as they skidded to a halt between Marcus and his attackers. Lucius leaped from his horse before it had even fully stopped. His sword was drawn, and his face was a mask of fury. The scarred man and his 2 companions realized the situation had changed instantly. They were professional killers, but they were not suicidal. With a quick signal, they turned and vanished into the thick crowd of travelers and merchants, disappearing down a narrow side path that led into the vineyards. Let them go! Lucius shouted to his men. Marcus is hurt. Lucius ran to Marcus's side. He looked at the blood soaking through the sleeve of Marcus's tunic. You look like you've been through a war, my friend. What happened at the villa? It was a trap. Lucius. Marcus said, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He gripped his wounded arm. But I have the truth. Senator Quintus was killed because of a debt to a group called the Snake. Valerus is the executioner. They have the Golden Eagle in a warehouse by the river, and they plan to kill the Emperor now, at the Forum. Lucius's face went pale. The procession has already begun. The Emperor is moving toward the Temple of Saturn to give his speech. The crowds are massive. Marcus ignored the stinging pain in his arm. He pulled the small jar from Dr. Galenus out of his pouch. They have a poison, the Night Shadow. A single scratch from a needle will kill him. We have to get to the front of the crowd. We have to find Valerus before he gets close enough to strike. Lucius helped Marcus onto one of the spare horses. The main roads will be blocked by the people. We'll have to take the back alleys and come in from the side of the Capitoline Hill. Then let's move. Marcus said, gritting his teeth as he pulled himself into the saddle. If the Golden Eagle is shown to the people after the Emperor falls, Rome will belong to the shadows. They turned their horses toward the city gates, riding at a dangerous speed. The wind whipped against Marcus's face, cooling the heat of his wound. He could see the white marble of the Forum ahead, glowing in the midday sun. It looked peaceful from a distance, but Marcus knew that underneath that beauty, a killer was waiting. Marcus and Lucius reached the edge of the Forum. The scene was overwhelming. Thousands of citizens had gathered, creating a sea of white togas and colorful tunics. The air was thick with the sound of 1,000 voices, the smell of incense, and the heavy heat of the afternoon sun. We can't ride any further. Lucius shouted over the noise. The horses will crush someone. They dismounted and pushed their way into the crowd. Marcus kept his hand on his sword hilt, his eyes scanning every face, every balcony, and every shadow between the massive stone columns. His wounded arm throbbed, but the adrenaline kept him moving. Ahead of them, the Emperor's procession was moving slowly toward the rostra, the large platform where speakers addressed the city. The Emperor, dressed in his purple-bordered toga, looked calm and powerful. He was surrounded by his Praetorian guards, but Marcus knew the danger wouldn't come from the front. A needle was small. A killer could be anyone standing within reach of the path. Look! Marcus pointed. On the steps of the Temple of Saturn, he saw a flash of red. It was Valerus. He wasn't hiding. He was standing with a group of lower-ranking officials, looking perfectly normal. But Marcus noticed that Valerus was slowly moving toward the edge of the cordoned path where the Emperor would pass in just a few minutes. I see him. Lucius whispered, his hand moving to his own weapon. But if we draw our swords now, the Praetorians will kill us before we get near him. They'll think we are the assassins. Then we don't use swords yet," Marcus said. He looked at the distance between them and Valerus. The crowd was too thick to run through. Suddenly, Marcus saw the hooded man, the one from the warehouse, standing on a balcony overlooking the path. He was holding something wrapped in a dark cloth. It was the Golden Eagle. They were waiting for the exact moment. The Emperor would be struck, the confusion would begin, and then the eagle would be revealed as a sign of a new order. "Lucius, get to the Praetorians. Tell them there is a threat from the rooftops. I'm going for Valerus," Marcus commanded. "It's a suicide mission. Marcus, just do it." Marcus lowered his head and began to shove through the crowd with all his strength. He was no longer an investigator or a citizen. He was a soldier on a battlefield. He had to reach that red cloak before the Emperor took another 10 steps. The air in the forum felt heavy, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. Marcus fought through the crowd, his shoulder aching from the effort of pushing past heavy bodies. He was only 20 paces away from Valerus now. The Emperor was closer. He was smiling, waving his hand to the cheering citizens. He had no idea that death was waiting in the hand of the man in the red cloak. Marcus saw Valerus reach into the folds of his tunic. His fingers emerged holding a long, slender silver needle. The tip caught the sunlight for a brief, terrifying second. It was wet with a dark, purple liquid. "Valerus!" Marcus roared. The shout was lost in the roar of the crowd. But Valerus heard the tone. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto Marcus. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Valerus did not look afraid. He looked determined. He turned back to the Emperor and stepped forward, his arm beginning to move toward the Emperor's neck. Marcus knew he couldn't reach him in time by pushing. He lunged forward, throwing his entire body weight against the last row of people. He collided with a tall merchant, sending both of them tumbling into the open path of the procession. The Praetorian guards reacted instantly. Spears were leveled at Marcus's chest. "Back! Get back!" One of them screamed. "The needle!" Marcus pointed at Valerus. "He has the poison. Stop him!" Valerus saw his window closing. He ignored the guards and lunged at the Emperor. But the split second of Marcus's distraction had been enough. The Emperor had turned his head to see the commotion on the ground. Instead of the neck, Valerus's needle struck the heavy gold embroidery on the Emperor's shoulder. Valerus pulled the needle back to strike again. But Marcus was already up. He didn't use his sword. He grabbed Valerus's wrist with both hands, twisting it with every ounce of strength he had left. "Drop it!" Marcus hissed. Valerus snarled, his face twisted in a mask of hatred. "You have ruined everything, soldier." They struggled in the middle of the path, surrounded by the most powerful men in Rome. The Emperor had been pulled back by his guards, his face pale with shock. Above them, on the balcony, the hooded man saw the failure. He didn't wait. He threw the dark cloth off the Golden Eagle, and for a moment, the sun hit the statue, blinding everyone below with a golden flash. "There!" Marcus shouted, still pinning Valerus's arm. "The eagle! Grab him!" The Praetorians moved. One group swarmed Valerus, pinning him to the stone floor. Another group began to charge toward the stairs leading to the balcony. The crowd, realizing something terrible was happening, began to turn from a cheering mob into a panicked wave. Marcus stood back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down at the stone floor. There, lying in a crack between the marble slabs, was the silver needle. It was broken. The forum was a storm of noise and movement. Praetorian guards swarmed the stairs leading to the balcony, their armor clanking and their boots thundering on the stone. Above, The hooded man realized he was cornered. He lifted the golden eagle high above his head, his face twisted in a desperate snarl. For a second, it looked as if he would throw the heavy gold statue over the railing to shatter it on the marble below. "No!" Marcus shouted, though his voice was thin from exhaustion. A flash of steel appeared behind the hooded man. It was Lucius. He had climbed a side pillar with the agility of a younger soldier. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it back. The golden eagle slipped from the man's fingers, but instead of falling to the street, it landed heavily on the balcony floor. Lucius tackled the man, pinning him against the stone railing as the other guards arrived to finish the job. Down in the path of the procession, Marcus stood over Valerus. The traitor was held down by 4 guards, his red cloak torn and his face pressed into the dirt. Marcus reached down and snatched the small leather tube from Valerus's belt. The list of debtors Flavius had mentioned. "You are a dead man, Marcus." Valerus hissed through the dust. "The snake has many heads. You have only cut off one. Then I will keep my sword sharp for the others." Marcus replied coldly. The emperor stepped forward, his breathing still heavy. He looked at the broken needle on the ground, then at Marcus. The emperor was a man of great dignity, and even in this moment of chaos, his eyes were steady. He looked at Marcus's blood-stained sleeve and the weary look in his eyes. "You are the investigator the senator hired," the emperor said. It was not a question. "I am Caesar," Marcus replied. He knelt on one knee, ignoring the sharp pain in his arm. He held out the leather tube. "This list contains the names of those who wished to see you fall. Senator Falco is among them. They used the senator's debts to turn his home into a trap." The emperor took the tube, his fingers brushing against the leather. He handed it to a high-ranking official without looking away from Marcus. "You have done more for Rome today than 100 senators. You saved the life of your emperor and returned the honor of a fallen house." Lucius descended the stairs, carrying the golden eagle. He walked through the parting crowd and placed the statue at the emperor's feet. The gold feathers shimmered in the afternoon sun, beautiful and untarnished. The crowd, seeing the sacred eagle returned and their leader safe, erupted into a roar of Ave Caesar. That shook the very air. Marcus felt the world start to tilt. The loss of blood and the long hours of fear were finally catching up to him. He felt a strong hand on his shoulder. It was Lucius. "Steady, friend," Lucius whispered. "The fight is over. You've won." Marcus looked at the golden eagle one last time. It was just a statue, but for a moment, it truly did look like a symbol of a city that refused to break. He let out a long breath and allowed the guards to lead him toward the shade of the portico. The cool air of the imperial palace was a sharp contrast to the baking heat and blood-slicked stones of the forum. Marcus sat on a stone bench in a private courtyard, his arm now cleaned and wrapped in fresh white linen. The scent of jasmine and the gentle splashing of a fountain should have been peaceful, but his mind was a whirlwind of the faces he had seen. Valerus's hatred, the hooded man's desperation, and the cold, calculating eyes of Senator Falco. A man approached from the shadows of the colonnade. He was not a soldier, but his presence was equally commanding. He wore a simple, dark tunic and carried a small wooden tablet. "The emperor is currently meeting with the Praetorian prefect," the man said. His voice was like dry parchment. "Many names on that list you provided have already been detained." Senator Falco was found at the docks, attempting to board a ship for Alexandria. He did not go quietly. Marcus looked up. And the list? Was it complete? The man, whose name was Secundus, the emperor's private secretary, sat down beside him. It was more than a list of names. Marcus, it was a ledger of souls. The snake, this Societas Serpentis, was not just a group of greedy men. They were systematic. They targeted senators with gambling debts, failed grain shipments, or expensive tastes. They provided the gold, and in return, they owned a vote in the Senate. The Golden Eagle was their insurance. Marcus realized, if the debt wasn't paid, they took the most valuable thing the family owned to shame them into obedience. Precisely. Secundus nodded. But there is a problem. The ledger mentions a master of scales. This person is not on the list of debtors, nor is he among those we have arrested. Valerus was the sword, and Falco was the coin. But the master is the mind, and the ledger suggests he is someone within these very walls. Marcus felt a familiar chill. The victory in the forum felt suddenly fragile. If he is in the palace, the emperor is still in danger. The emperor believes the threat is over. Secundus said quietly, looking around to ensure they were not overheard. He wants to celebrate the return of the eagle with a week of games. He thinks showing strength will bury the conspiracy. But I have seen the way the master operates in these papers. He is a spider. Marcus. He will not run. He will simply wait for the next opening. Marcus stood up, his wound throbbing with the sudden movement. Then I cannot leave yet. My service to Senator Quintus was to find his killer. I found the hand, but the heart of the beast is still beating. Secundus looked at him with a mixture of respect and pity. You were a soldier. Marcus. You know that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who smiles at you across the dinner table. If you stay, you are no longer just an investigator. You are a threat to someone very powerful. I have been a threat to powerful men before. Marcus said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Tell me where to start. Marcus left the courtyard and followed Secundus through the winding corridors of the palace. The walls were decorated with frescoes of ancient myths, but to Marcus, the painted eyes of the gods seemed to watch him with suspicion. Secundus led him to the imperial library, a vast hall filled with thousands of scrolls arranged in cedar-wood pigeonholes. The air was dry and smelled intensely of old parchment and beeswax. The Master of Scales. Secundus whispered, gesturing to the rows of documents. That title is not a common one. It sounds like someone involved in the treasury or the grain dole. But in these records, the master is linked to something called the Great Balance. We found references to it in the back of the ledger you recovered from Valerus. Marcus walked slowly down the center aisle. The floor was made of polished green marble that reflected the dim light from the high windows. If he is the Master of Scales, he must deal with the city's accounts. Who has access to the private records of every senator's wealth? Only a few. Secundus replied. The censors, the quaestors of the treasury, and the emperor's own financial advisors. But there is one man who has held his position through 3 different emperors. A man who knows where every copper coin in Rome is buried. The chief archivist. Marcus guessed. Aurelius. Secundus confirmed. He is an old man now, nearly blind, but his memory is a map of the city's secrets. He lives in a small suite of rooms at the far end of this library. He rarely leaves, and he rarely speaks to anyone outside of official business. Marcus moved toward the back of the library. He felt out of place among the scrolls. He was a man of action, of iron and blood, not ink and dust. As he approached the archway leading to the archivist's quarters, he noticed a strange smell. It wasn't the scent of parchment. It was a faint, bitter odor, the smell of burning almond shells. He drew his dagger, his instincts screaming. He pushed open the heavy oak door. The room inside was small and cluttered with tablets. A single lamp flickered on a desk, casting long, dancing shadows. In the center of the room, slumped over a pile of records, was an old man in a grey tunic. Marcus rushed to his side. Aurelius was still breathing, but his breath was shallow and came in ragged gasps. On the desk, a small bowl of charcoal was still smoking. Secundus. Help me! Marcus shouted. He grabbed the old man and pulled him away from the desk toward the open door. The bitter smell was stronger here. Marcus recognized it from his time in the East. Cyanide, derived from the pits of fruits. Someone had tried to suffocate the old man with poisonous fumes while he slept. Marcus looked at the desk. A large scroll was open, but several lines had been freshly scraped away with a sharp blade. The ink was still damp on the floor where it had been spilled. Aurelius groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at Marcus with a gaze that was clouded but filled with a sudden, sharp terror. The scales. The old man rasped, his voice barely a breath. The scales are tipped. They are in the basement, under the temple of Juno. Before Marcus could ask more, the old man's head fell back. He wasn't dead, but he had slipped into a deep, poison-induced sleep. Marcus looked back at the desk. The assassin had been here only minutes ago. The master of scales was cleaning his tracks, and the next track led deep beneath the city. Marcus left the library in a blur of movement. He didn't wait for Secundus to gather guards. The archives were already being watched, and the assassin could be anywhere. He needed to reach the temple of Juno Moneta on the Capitoline Hill. The word moneta was the origin of the word for money, and the temple housed the Roman mint. If the master of scales was hiding there, he was sitting at the very heart of Rome's wealth. The climb up the steep stairs of the Capitoline was grueling. His wounded arm burned with a dull, rhythmic ache, and his breath came in short bursts. The sun was setting, casting a bloody orange light over the rooftops of the city. The Temple of Juno stood like a fortress against the sky, its white marble columns gleaming with a deceptive purity. He didn't approach the main entrance. As a soldier, Marcus knew that the front door was for guests and the side door was for business. He circled the base of the temple until he found the entrance used by the workers of the mint. 2 guards stood there, but they were distracted, laughing over a game of dice. Marcus used the deep shadows of the evening to slip past them, moving with the silence of a man who had spent years scouting enemy camps in the forests of Gaul. Inside, the air changed. It was hot and smelled of molten metal and charcoal. The rhythmic action of the heavy coin presses echoed through the stone hallways, sounding like the heartbeat of the empire. Marcus moved toward the stairs that led to the lower levels, the vaults where the finished coins and the raw bullion were kept. The basement was a maze of narrow passages. Here, the noise of the presses was muffled, replaced by a strange, metallic clinking. Marcus rounded a corner and stopped. He saw a heavy bronze door standing slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled out onto the floor. He peered inside. The room was filled with hundreds of small wooden crates. In the center of the room stood a large, complex set of bronze scales. A man in a dark, expensive toga was standing at the scales, meticulously weighing small stacks of silver denarii. Beside him stood a massive man with the arms of a blacksmith, holding a heavy iron bar. The ratio is still off, the man in the toga said. His voice was calm and precise, the voice of a man who loved numbers more than people. If we reduce the silver by another 5%, the common people will not notice, but the Societas Serpentis will have enough gold to buy the loyalty of the next 3 legions. Marcus realized the true horror of the plan. They weren't just stealing gold. They were debasing the currency. They were slowly replacing the silver in the Roman coins with lead and copper. It was a silent murder of the empire's economy. By the time the people realized their money was worthless, the master of scales would have enough real gold to crown a new emperor. Marcus stepped into the light, his sword drawn. The scales are tipped, just as Aurelius said. The man in the toga didn't jump. He slowly turned around. He was middle-aged, with a face that was entirely unremarkable. The perfect face for a man who wanted to remain invisible. Marcus the investigator. The man said, a thin smile touching his lips. You have a persistent habit of surviving. But you are a soldier. You understand the necessity of a strong foundation. I am simply renovating the house." The man in the toga was Julianus, the assistant treasurer. He was a man who had spent 20 years in the background, counting coins while more ambitious men fought for glory in the Senate. He looked at Marcus with a cold, analytical detachment, as if the investigator were merely a line of bad debt that needed to be erased. "Renovating the house with lead." Marcus spat, his eyes flicking to the blacksmith who was slowly raising the iron bar. "You're stealing the lifeblood of Rome. Every soldier on the frontier, every merchant in the market, they all trust that the coin in their hand is worth its weight. If that trust dies, the empire dies with it." Julianus laughed softly. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Trust is a luxury for the ignorant. Marcus, power is the only reality. The senator you were so fond of, Quintus, understood this too late. He thought he could borrow the future to pay for the present. I am simply collecting the interest." The blacksmith moved. He was surprisingly fast for a man of his size. He swung the iron bar in a low arc, aiming for Marcus's knees. Marcus leaped back, the metal whistling through the air where his legs had been a second before. He countered with a quick thrust of his sword, but the blacksmith used the heavy bar as a shield, the iron clanging against Marcus's steel blade. "Finish him, Rufus," Julianus said, turning back to his scales as if the fight were a minor distraction. "We have 3 more crates to process before the morning shift arrives." Rufus roared and lunged. He didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a force of nature. He used his massive weight to shove Marcus against a stack of wooden crates. The wood splintered, and several jars of copper slugs spilled across the floor, making the footing treacherous. Marcus struggled to regain his balance. His wounded arm flared with agony, the white linen bandage beginning to redden again. He realized he couldn't win a test of strength against this giant. He had to use the environment. As Rufus raised the iron bar for a crushing overhead blow, Marcus dove between the giant's legs. He rolled across the gritty floor and kicked a heavy bucket of molten lead that sat cooling near a small furnace. The bucket tipped, and the thick, hot liquid poured across the floor. Rufus cried out as the heat reached his sandaled feet. He stumbled back, his heavy boots slipping on the spilled copper slugs. Marcus didn't hesitate. He rose and drove his shoulder into the giant's chest, sending him sprawling into the large bronze scales. The scales collapsed with a thunderous crash of metal. Julianus finally looked alarmed. He dropped the silver coins he was holding and reached into his desk for a small, concealed dagger. "You've destroyed the balance," Julianus screamed, his calm mask finally breaking. "Do you have any idea how much work it took to calibrate those? The only balance I care about is justice," Marcus said, stepping over the groaning blacksmith. He leveled his sword at Julianus's throat. "Where is the rest of it? The gold you stole from the senator's house. The gold that was meant to pay for the city's grain." Julianus looked at the blade, his chest heaving. "It's gone, Marcus. It's already been sent to the legions in the north. My master doesn't just want Rome's money. He wants its loyalty. And soldiers are very loyal to the man who pays them in real gold." The tip of Marcus's sword remained steady against Julianus's throat. The air in the basement was stifling, filled with the smell of scorched iron and the coppery tang of spilled blood. Rufus, the massive blacksmith, groaned on the floor, his legs seared by the molten lead, but he was no longer a threat. The true danger sat in the words Julianus had just uttered. "The Northern Legions?" Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Which ones?" "Rome has 3 legions guarding the Rhine. If they turn their back on the emperor for your stolen gold, the frontier will collapse." Julianus sneered, the fear of the blade eclipsed by his fanaticism. "The 14th and the 16th. They have been freezing in the mud of Germania for years while the politicians in the Senate feast on peacocks. They don't care about honor or the eagle. They care about weight. And the gold I sent them weighs more than the emperor's empty promises. Marcus felt a cold weight in his stomach. The northern legions were the iron wall of the empire. If they marched on Rome, or worse, if they simply stopped fighting the Germanic tribes because they were being paid by a shadow group, the city would fall within weeks. How did you move that much gold out of the city without being seen? Marcus demanded. Julianus looked toward a stack of crates marked with the seal of the imperial grain dole. We are Rome's accountants. Marcus. We move thousands of tons of grain every month to feed the masses. No one checks the bottom of a grain barge. They only check the top. The gold is tucked beneath the wheat, moving north on the river systems. Marcus reached down with his free hand and grabbed a leather-bound logbook from the desk. He flipped it open. It was filled with numbers, but he recognized the names of the river ports: Mogontiacum, Castrovetera, and Colonia. These were the supply hubs for the Rhine frontier. Suddenly, the heavy bronze door to the basement was kicked open. Marcus spun around, expecting Lucius and the guards, but he saw men in the dark, segmented armor of the Praetorian Guard. However, these were not the men who had stood by the emperor in the forum. Their leader was a man Marcus didn't recognize, his face hidden behind a crested helmet. Julianus. The leader said, ignoring Marcus. The Master of Scales has ordered a cleanup. You were supposed to be finished an hour ago. Julianus's face went pale. He realized he was no longer an asset to the snake. He was a loose thread. Wait. I can still fix the ratio. The investigator. The lead Praetorian didn't wait for him to finish. He raised a heavy crossbow and fired. The bolt struck Julianus in the chest, pinning his fine toga to the wooden crates behind him. The assistant treasurer gasped once, his eyes wide with shock, and then went still. Now for the soldier, the Praetorian said, refocusing his aim on Marcus. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed the logbook, kicked over the small oil lamp on the desk to create a distraction of fire, and dove into the dark passages of the mint. He was the only man left who knew exactly where the gold was going, and he was being hunted by the very guards meant to protect the state. The darkness of the mint's lower levels swallowed Marcus as he sprinted away from the light of the fire he had started. Behind him, the shouts of the corrupt Praetorians echoed against the damp stone walls. He could hear the clatter of their heavy soldiers' boots on the masonry. They knew these tunnels, but Marcus had the desperation of a man who held the survival of the empire in his hands. He reached a dead end where the air grew thick and foul. A heavy iron grate barred his path. Through the bars, he could see the rushing, black waters of a secondary branch of the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer system of Rome. It was a terrifying prospect, but the sound of the Praetorians' crossbows being reloaded left him no other choice. Using the hilt of his sword, Marcus hammered at the rusted hinges of the grate. The metal screamed, a sound that surely gave away his position. Just as a bolt whistled past his ear and sparked against the stone, the hinge snapped. Marcus heaved the grate open and plunged into the darkness. The water was icy and reached his waist. The smell was overpowering, a mixture of rot and stagnant mud. But he kept the leather logbook held high above his head. He waded forward, his feet slipping on the slick, moss-covered stones. Above him, the voices of the guards grew muffled. They were hesitant to follow him into the belly of the city. "He's as good as dead in there," one guard shouted from the opening. "No one survives the deep channels without a light." Marcus didn't stop to listen. He moved by touch, one hand on the cold, curved brickwork of the ceiling. The Cloaca Maxima was a masterpiece of Roman engineering, a hidden city beneath the streets. But at night, it was a tomb. He counted his steps, trying to visualize the map of the city above. If he followed the flow, he would eventually reach the Tiber. but that would put him right back in the territory of the river gangs. After what felt like hours, he saw a glimmer of moonlight reflecting off the water ahead. He had reached an overflow vent near the Velabrum, the low ground between the Palatine and Capitoline hills. He climbed a series of iron rungs built into the wall, his muscles screaming with fatigue. When he finally emerged into the night air, he was shivering and covered in filth. But he was alive. He collapsed against the side of a small shrine to Hercules, clutching the logbook to his chest. The city was quiet, but it was a deceptive peace. He looked at the logbook. The ink was slightly smudged from the humidity, but the names were still clear. It wasn't just the northern legions. There were names of suppliers in Ostia, the port of Rome, and captains of the grain fleet. The master of scales was strangling the city from both ends, starving the people while bribing the soldiers. Marcus knew he couldn't go back to his apartment, and he couldn't trust the palace guards. He needed someone outside the system. He thought of Livia, the senator's daughter. She was hidden in a safe house near the Aventine Hill. She had the connections to the old families who still hated the new money of the treasury. One more walk. Marcus whispered to himself, forcing his leaden legs to move. One more walk for Rome. The Aventine Hill was a place of quiet dignity, away from the stench of the Subura and the political noise of the Forum. Marcus moved through the shadows of the cypress trees, his breath hitching as he approached a small, nondescript villa tucked behind the Temple of Diana. This was the home of a retired centurion named Varro, a man who owed his life to the late Senator Quintus. Marcus didn't knock. He gave a low whistle, a signal used by the scouts of the 10th Legion. A few moments later, the door opened just enough for a pair of eyes to peer out. "By the gods, Marcus," Varro whispered, pulling him inside. "You smell like the mouth of Orcus. What happened?" "The mint happened," Marcus said, collapsing into a wooden chair. He barely noticed the fine rugs or the warm light of the oil lamps. He looked toward the back of the room as Livia emerged from the shadows. She looked pale, her eyes red from mourning her father, but when she saw Marcus, a spark of resolve returned to her gaze. "You found it?" she asked, her eyes falling on the mud-stained logbook. "I found the engine of the conspiracy," Marcus said, his voice raspy. "Your father didn't just owe money. Livia." He discovered that the treasury was being drained to bribe the Rhine legions. They killed him because he was going to the emperor with the proof. Livia took the logbook, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. "These names. Some of these men were at our house for dinner only last month. They sat at my father's table while they were planning to destroy him." "We don't have much time," Marcus warned. "The Praetorians are compromised. Not all of them, but enough to make the palace a cage. If we go to the emperor now, we might walk right into the master of scales' hands. Then we go to the people who still care about the law." Livia said, her voice growing stronger. "My father had allies in the College of Pontiffs and among the old families of the Senate who haven't been bought. If we can prove the currency is being debased, the merchants in the Forum will revolt. The snake cannot survive a city that refuses to trade." Marcus shook his head. "A riot won't stop the legions in the north. If they march, a merchant's protest is just more fuel for the fire. We need to stop the gold before it reaches the frontier. The logbook says the last shipment left Ostia this morning." Varro stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his old service sword. "Ostia is only 16 miles away. If we take the fast horses from the courier stables, we can reach the port before the tide turns." Marcus looked at his wounded arm. The bleeding had stopped, but the limb felt heavy and slow. He looked at Livia, then at the logbook. "The ship is named the Alcyone," Marcus said, pointing to a smudge of ink on the last page. "It's a grain freighter, but it's carrying enough gold to buy a civil war. If that ship reaches the Rhine, the empire as we know it is over." Livia stood tall. Then we don't let it leave. Varro, get the horses. Marcus, you need to eat and bind that wound properly. We leave in an hour. The night air was a cold whip against Marcus's face as they thundered down the Via Ostiensis. Under the silver light of a waning moon, the road stretched out like a pale ribbon through the salt marshes. Marcus, Livia, and Varro rode in a tight formation, the rhythmic pounding of hooves the only sound in the desolate landscape. Marcus's arm was tightly bound in leather strips, the pain dampened by a bitter herbal draught Varro had forced him to drink. His mind, however, was sharp. He kept thinking about the Alcyone. A grain freighter was a heavy, slow-moving beast. If they reached the port of Ostia by dawn, they might catch it before it cleared the mouth of the Tiber. Look! Varro shouted over the wind, pointing ahead. The horizon was beginning to glow with a faint, bruised purple. In the distance, the massive stone lighthouse of Ostia, the Pharos, loomed like a ghost. The port was the gateway to Rome, a sprawling complex of warehouses, docks, and temples where the wealth of the world was funneled into the city's hungry maw. As they neared the city gates, Marcus signaled for them to slow down. They couldn't afford a loud entrance. Ostia was a nest of sailors, merchants, and, most importantly, the vigils, the city watch. If the master of scales had influence in Rome, his reach surely extended to the docks. We leave the horses at the salt works. Marcus commanded. We enter on foot. If the Alcyone is docked, she'll be in the inner basin, near the great storehouses. They slipped through the side gate, moving past stacks of amphorae and crates of dried fish. The smell of the sea, salt, tar, and rotting seaweed, filled the air. The port was waking up. Slaves were already hauling heavy loads, and the first calls of the market vendors were beginning to echo. They reached the edge of the Kothun, the artificial inner harbor. Dozens of ships were moored there, their masts looking like a leafless forest. Marcus's eyes scanned the hulls until he saw it, a broad-beamed merchantman with a painted eye on its prow and the name Alcyone carved into its side. The ship was not docked. It was already pulling away from the stone quay, being towed by two small rowing boats. Sailors were scurrying up the rigging to unfurl the massive square sail. We're too late. Livia gasped, her hand clutching the logbook. Not yet. Marcus said, his eyes locking onto a small skiff tied to a nearby piling. Varro, take Livia to the port prefect's office. Show him the logbook. If he's an honest man, he'll send the patrol galleys. If he's not, well, try to stay alive. What are you doing? Livia asked, terror in her voice. I'm going to board that ship. Marcus said, drawing his dagger. That gold doesn't leave this harbor. Before they could protest, Marcus leaped into the skiff and cut the rope. He grabbed the oars, ignoring the fire in his wounded arm, and began to row with a desperate, rhythmic fury toward the retreating shadow of the Alcyone. The Alcyone was gaining speed. The two towing boats had cast off their lines, and the great square sail was now catching the morning breeze. Marcus rowed until his lungs burned and his vision blurred. He was chasing a mountain of wood and hemp with a tiny splinter of a boat. He timed his approach with the rhythm of the waves, pulling the skiff alongside the massive wooden hull of the freighter just as it cleared the inner basin. High above him, the ship's side rose like a cliff. Marcus saw a heavy rope ladder trailing in the water, a careless mistake by a hurried sailor. He stood up in the rocking skiff, his heart hammering against his ribs. He made a desperate leap, his hands closing around the rough, salt-crusted hemp. The skiff drifted away into the wake, leaving him hanging over the churning grey water of the Tiber's mouth. He climbed. Every inch was a battle against the weight of his own body and the stabbing pain in his arm. He reached the rail and rolled onto the deck, staying low behind a stack of grain sacks. The ship smelled of dust, old wood, and the iron tang of hidden treasure. Hey! You there! A voice barked. Marcus looked up. A sailor with a scarred face and a heavy wooden belaying pin was standing 5 paces away. Behind him, 3 more men emerged from the shadows of the mainmast. These weren't regular merchants. They wore leather breastplates and carried short swords. The Master of Scales had placed a guard on his gold. "I am an officer of the city," Marcus said, standing up and drawing his sword. His voice was cold and official, even as he struggled for breath. "This ship is under arrest by order of the Emperor. Drop your weapons." The men laughed. The sailor with the belaying pin stepped forward. "The Emperor's orders don't reach past the shoreline, soldier. Out here, the only law is the weight of the purse. And our purse is very heavy." Marcus didn't wait for them to surround him. He lunged, his blade flickering like a serpent. He struck the belaying pin from the sailor's hand and followed with a heavy kick that sent the man sprawling into a coil of rope. The 3 guards closed in, their swords raised. The deck of a ship was a treacherous battlefield. It swayed and pitched with the sea, and the air was a maze of ropes and pulleys. Marcus used the environment to his advantage. He ducked under a swinging boom, letting the heavy wood strike one of his attackers in the shoulder. He parried a thrust from the second guard and countered with a pummel strike to the man's temple. But the third guard was more skilled. He kept his distance, waiting for Marcus to tire. "You're a fool to come alone." The guard sneered. "There are 20 of us on this ship, and only one of you." "I'm not looking to kill all of you," Marcus said, his eyes darting to the heavy hatch of the main hold. "I'm just looking to sink the evidence." He grabbed a nearby oil lamp from its bracket on the mast. The glass was hot, and the oil sloshed inside. The guard's eyes widened as he realized Marcus's intent. A fire on a wooden ship was a death sentence for everyone on board. "Don't do it," the guard shouted, stepping back. "Then show me the gold," Marcus commanded. "Show me what you're willing to die for." The guard hesitated, his sword arm trembling. A fire in the middle of the Mediterranean was a nightmare every sailor feared. Before he could decide whether to lunge or surrender, a heavy door beneath the aft deck opened. A man stepped out, dressed not in a sailor's tunic, but in the refined, dark wool of a Roman bureaucrat. It was Secundus, the Emperor's secretary Marcus had trusted in the palace. Marcus's heart sank. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. "You," Marcus whispered, the oil lamp still held precariously over the grain sacks. "You were the one who told me about the Master of Scales. You were the one who pointed me toward Aurelius. And you were the perfect hound." "Marcus," Secundus said, his voice as smooth and cold as marble. "I needed someone to flush out the loose ends. Julianus was becoming greedy. Aurelius knew too much. You did the cleaning for me, and now, you've brought yourself right to the heart of the operation." Secundus gestured to the guards. They didn't move toward Marcus. They moved toward the main hatch and heaved it open. The smell of grain was replaced by the cold, metallic scent of wealth. Marcus looked down into the hold. Beneath a thin layer of wheat lay hundreds of heavy iron-bound chests. One had been pried open, revealing the glint of pure, unadulterated gold, the real currency stolen from the state, destined to buy the souls of the northern legions. "You see, Marcus," Secundus continued, stepping closer, "Rome isn't built on ideals. It's built on the flow of coin. The Emperor is a philosopher, a dreamer. He doesn't understand that a soldier's loyalty isn't to a throne, but to the hand that feeds his family. I am simply ensuring the right hand is doing the feeding." "By starving the city," Marcus countered, his grip tightening on the lamp. "By debasing the silver so the poor can't buy bread." "The poor are a tide," Secundus said dismissively. "They rise, they fall. But the legions are the walls. If the walls stand, the city survives, under whatever master I choose. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed across the water. A fountain of spray erupted just 10 paces from the Alcyone's hull. Marcus looked over the railing. 2 fast-moving Liburnian galleys, the greyhounds of the Roman navy, were racing toward them, their oars flashing in the morning sun. On the lead galley's prow stood Varro, waving a crimson flag. It seems the port prefect was an honest man, Marcus said, a grim smile touching his lips. Secundus's face twisted in rage. Kill him. Get that lamp away from the grain. The guards lunged. Marcus didn't drop the lamp on the grain. Instead, he smashed it against the wooden mast. A sheet of flame erupted, climbing the tar-slicked ropes of the rigging. The sail above caught instantly, turning into a giant, orange curtain of fire. The ship lurched as the wind caught the dying sail one last time. Marcus used the confusion to dive toward the open hatch. If he couldn't stop the ship, he would make sure the gold never reached the Rhine. He grabbed a heavy iron bar used for securing the hatch and jammed it into the steering assembly near the rudder. The Alcyone began to spin, losing its heading just as the first Navy galley slammed into its side with a sickening crunch of timber. The impact of the Liburnian galley was like a thunderclap. The Alcyone groaned, its thick oak ribs screaming under the pressure of the collision. Marcus was thrown against the mainmast, the heat from the burning rigging searing the back of his neck. All around him, the world was a chaos of splintering wood, shouting men, and the roar of the fire as it raced toward the dry grain in the hold. Secundus had been thrown to the deck by the impact. He scrambled toward the railing, his face no longer that of a calm bureaucrat, but of a trapped animal. The guards were in no better shape. One had been crushed by a falling spar, and the others were desperately trying to lower a small boat. The gold! Secundus screamed, pointing at the open hatch. Do not let it sink. But it was too late. The Alcyone was taking on water fast. The iron bar Marcus had jammed into the steering assembly had caused the ship to list sharply to the port side. As the Navy galley backed away to avoid the flames, the merchant ship began to roll. Marcus pulled himself up, his eyes locked on Secundus. It's over. Secundus. The gold belongs to the sea now. Secundus reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, ornate dagger. It was the same design as the one Marcus had seen in the senator's study, the mark of the snake. If I cannot have the empire, I will at least have your life, soldier. He lunged at Marcus. Despite his age, Secundus was fast, fueled by a desperate, cold rage. Marcus parried the first blow with his sword, but the deck was slick with oil and seawater. He slipped, and Secundus's blade grazed his shoulder, cutting through the leather of his armor. Marcus gritted his teeth and kicked out, catching Secundus in the chest. The secretary stumbled back, hitting the railing. At that moment, a massive section of the burning mast snapped, crashing down between them. A wall of fire separated the two men. Marcus! A voice called from the water. He looked over the side. The first galley had circled back, and Varro was standing at the edge, a coiled rope in his hand. Jump! She's going to go under in minutes. Marcus looked at the open hatch one last time. The water was pouring into the hold, swirling around the heavy chests. The gold was too heavy to float, and too deep to recover without months of work. The bribe for the northern legions was being buried under 30 feet of silt and salt water. He turned to look for Secundus, but the secretary was gone. He had either jumped or been swallowed by the smoke. Marcus didn't wait to find out. He took a deep breath, ignored the agony in his arm, and leaped over the railing into the cold, churning embrace of the Tiber's mouth. The water was a shock to his system. It felt like 1,000 needles pricking his skin. He struggled to the surface, gasping for air, as the Alcyone gave one final, shuddering moan. The ship tilted vertically, its burning bow pointing toward the heavens, before sliding beneath the waves in a massive hiss of steam and bubbling foam. The surface of the water was littered with debris, charred wood, floating grain sacks, and the bobbing heads of a few lucky sailors. Marcus felt a strong hand grab the collar of his tunic. With a grunt of effort, Varro and 2 other marines hauled him over the side of the galley. He collapsed onto the deck, shivering violently as the adrenaline began to drain from his body. "You're a madman, Marcus," Varro said, throwing a heavy wool cloak over his shoulders. "I've seen some desperate things in the legions, but boarding a burning freighter solo, that's for the poets to lie about." Marcus couldn't speak for a moment. He watched the last bubbles from the Alcyone disappear. The sea was calm again, hiding the millions of gold sestertii that now lay in the mud of the harbor floor. The bribe was gone. The Northern legions would receive no secret payment this month. "Secundus," Marcus finally managed to rasp, his voice raw from the smoke. Varro shook his head. "We didn't see him come up. If he didn't make it to one of the small boats, his with the gold now. Fitting, I suppose. He wasn't the head," Marcus said, clutching the cloak tighter. "He was the voice. The Master of Scales is still in the city. The logbook Livia has is the only thing that can finish this." Livia emerged from the galley's small cabin. She looked at Marcus with a mixture of relief and profound sadness. She knelt beside him, ignoring the soot and salt water on his clothes. "The port prefect is holding the other ships," she said quietly. "He's a cousin of the Claudii family. He knew my father. When he saw the imperial seal on the logbook and the records of the grain theft, he didn't hesitate. He's already sent riders to Rome to alert the city watch." "We need to get back," Marcus said, trying to stand. His legs felt like lead. If Secundus was the secretary, he has allies in the palace who don't know the ship has sunk yet. They will be waiting for a signal. If they don't get it, they might move sooner than we think. "The wind is with us," the galley's captain shouted from the steering oars. "We can reach the city docks by noon if we pull hard." The Liburnian galley turned its prow back toward Rome. The rhythmic beat of the drum set the pace for the rowers, a steady heartbeat. He looked back at the lighthouse of Ostia. He had started this journey looking for a stolen statue, and he had ended it by sinking the wealth of a province. The journey up the Tiber was a blur. Marcus slept fitfully, his dreams filled with golden eagles and snakes made of coins. When he woke, the great circus and the Palatine Hill were looming over them. The city looked the same, grand, eternal, and indifferent. But Marcus knew that beneath the marble skin, the poison was still flowing. As the galley docked, a line of soldiers in the black armor of the urban cohorts was waiting. They weren't the Praetorians. These were the city's policemen, led by an officer Marcus recognized from his early days in the service. "Marcus the investigator?" the officer asked, stepping forward. "The Emperor has been asking for you, and he doesn't look like a man who wants to wait for an answer." The walk from the docks to the Palatine Hill felt longer than the ride from Ostia. Marcus, flanked by Varro and the urban cohorts, moved through a city that felt on the edge of a fever. Rumors of the fire at the port had already reached the markets, and the people were gathered in small, anxious groups near the fountains. Marcus kept his head down, the weight of the missing gold and the betrayal of Secundus pressing on him like a physical burden. They were led not to the public reception halls, but to the tablinum, the emperor's private study. The room was circular, filled with maps of the provinces and statues of the great Caesars. The emperor stood by a large window, his back to the door, looking out over the Roman Forum. The golden eagle, returned to its place of honor on a marble pedestal, glowed in the afternoon light. "Leave us," the emperor said, his voice quiet but echoing in the stone room. Varro and the guards bowed and exited, leaving only Marcus and Livia. The silence stretched for a long minute. Finally, the Emperor turned. His face was tired, his eyes heavy with the weight of a ruler who has just realized his own house is full of vipers. "Secundus is dead," the Emperor stated. It wasn't a question. The port prefect's riders arrived an hour ago. They say a freighter carrying the state's grain, and a fortune in gold, is at the bottom of the sea. It was not grain. "Caesar," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "It was the price of a rebellion. Secundus was moving that gold to the Rhine. He intended to buy the legions and replace you with a man the Societas Serpentis could control." Livia stepped forward, holding out the logbook. "My father died trying to bring this to you, Caesar. He discovered the debasement of the currency at the mint and the secret shipments. He was not a debtor, he was a martyr for the truth." The Emperor took the logbook, his fingers tracing the bloodstains on the cover. He flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening as he saw the names of his advisors, his friends, and even members of his own household. "I am a philosopher," the Emperor whispered, almost to himself. "I spent my nights studying the stars and the works of Plato, thinking that reason would govern this city. Meanwhile, the men I trusted were counting the cost of my head." He looked at Marcus. "You destroyed the gold. You realized that if the state could not have it, the enemy should not either. It was a soldier's choice. A hard choice. The gold can be replaced in time, Caesar," Marcus replied. "But the trust of the legions, once bought by a traitor, can never be won back. I did what I had to do to keep the wall on the Rhine from crumbling." The Emperor nodded slowly. He walked to the golden eagle and placed a hand on its cold, metallic wing. "The eagle has returned, but the nest is still full of snakes. The logbook tells me who provided the coin, but there is one name missing. The Master of Scales. Julianus is dead. Secundus is dead, but the one who orchestrated the Great Balance, the one who knew the exact weights of the treasury, is still here. I believe I know where he is," Marcus said, a memory of the mint surfacing. "He isn't a man of the sword or a man of the Senate. He is a man of the shadows, and he is waiting for the one thing he loves more than gold, the final accounting." Marcus left the Emperor's study with a singular purpose. He didn't need a map or a guide. He followed the logic of a man who dealt in numbers. If Julianus was the assistant treasurer and Secundus was the secretary, the only person who stood above them, the only person with the total authority to audit the empire's wealth without question, was the curator of the fiscus, a man named Tertius. Tertius was a ghost in the palace. He was an elderly man, often seen huddled in a moth-eaten wool cloak, moving through the halls with a stack of wax tablets. He was considered harmless, a relic of a previous administration who cared for nothing but the price of grain and the weight of silver. But Marcus now saw the pattern. The Master of Scales wouldn't be a flashy senator like Falco. He would be the man who made the world run on paper. Marcus did not head for the treasury. Instead, he went to the Aerarium, the ancient temple basement where the state's most ancient records were kept. It was a cold, damp place, lit only by a few sputtering torches. The air was thick with the smell of old cedar and the metallic tang of bronze. He found Tertius sitting at a small, scarred wooden desk at the very back of the vault. The old man was hunched over a ledger, his quill scratching rhythmically against the parchment. He didn't look up when Marcus entered. "The Alcyone has been lost to the waves, Tertius," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. The scratching stopped. Tertius didn't turn around. "A tragic loss of grain," the old man whispered. "The people will be hungry this winter. It wasn't grain you were counting, and you know it." Marcus stepped closer, his hand on his sword. "Secundus is gone. Julianus is dead. The Emperor has the logbook. The balance you tried to strike is broken." Tertius slowly turned his chair. His eyes were not the clouded eyes of a confused old man. They were as sharp and cold as a winter morning in the Alps. The balance is never broken, Marcus. It merely shifts. You think you've saved the empire. You've only delayed the inevitable. Rome is a bankrupt whore dressing in the jewels of her ancestors. I was trying to give her a new foundation. By stealing from her people and bribing her defenders. By ensuring that those who actually hold the power, the men with the iron, are the ones who get the gold. Tertius snapped, standing up. He looked surprisingly tall when he wasn't hunching. The emperor speaks of virtue while the borders are a sieve. I saw the truth of the scales. To save the body, sometimes you must cut off a limb. Tertius reached into a drawer of his desk. Marcus expected a dagger, but the old man pulled out a small, heavy bronze weight, the standard used to calibrate the scales of the mint. On its side was engraved the symbol of the snake eating the eagle. I am the master of scales, Tertius said with a strange, quiet pride. And even now, I have one final entry to make in the ledger. Suddenly, the shadows behind the pillars moved. 3 men, dressed in the simple tunics of palace scribes but moving with the lethal precision of trained assassins, stepped into the torchlight. They weren't carrying swords, they held garrotes and thin, poisoned needles. You should have taken the gold from Flavius when you had the chance, soldier, Tertius said, backing away into the darkness of the archives. It would have been a much softer ending. The narrow aisles of the aerarium were a claustrophobic maze of towering wooden shelves. Thousands of scrolls, some dating back to the Republic, formed dry, brittle walls that smelled of dust and impending fire. Marcus stood his ground as the 3 assassins closed in. In the confined space, a long sword was a liability. But Marcus was a veteran of the tight shield walls of the north. He drew his gladius, the short, stabbing blade designed for exactly this kind of close-quarter slaughter. The first scribe lunged, the wire of his garrote glinting in the flickering torchlight. Marcus didn't parry. He stepped into the attack, catching the man's forearm with his leather-bound wrist and driving the pommel of his sword into the assassin's throat. The man collapsed, gagging, but the other 2 were already upon him. One flicked a thin, poisoned needle toward Marcus's face. Marcus ducked, the needle into a cedar scroll case. He kicked a heavy stool into the path of the second attacker and used the momentary distraction to sweep a stack of heavy clay tablets off a shelf. They shattered on the floor, creating a treacherous field of sharp ceramic shards. You're fighting for a ghost, Tertius, Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the vaults. The Emperor's guards are already sealing the palace. The palace is a labyrinth, Marcus. Tertius's voice drifted from somewhere deep within the stacks. And I have lived in its stomach for 40 years. I know exits that aren't even on the architect's maps. Marcus slashed through a curtain of hanging parchment to reach the second assassin. The man was quick, dancing back and drawing a curved sickle blade from beneath his tunic. They traded blows in the dim light, the steel clashing against the wooden shelves, sending clouds of ancient dust into the air. Marcus's wounded arm screamed with every movement, but he channeled the pain into a brutal efficiency. He feinted high, then drove his blade through the assassin's ribs. The third man, seeing his companions fall, didn't stay to fight. He turned and fled into the darkness, following the master of scales. Marcus didn't stop to check the bodies. He sprinted after the retreating sound of footsteps. He passed the main desk, noting that Tertius had set a small candle beneath a pile of loose papers. The old man was trying to burn the evidence, and the archives with it. Marcus didn't have time to douse the flame. He leaped over the desk and plunged into a tunnel that led deeper into the foundations of the Palatine Hill. The tunnel was narrow and damp, the walls made of ancient, uncut tufa stone. Up ahead, he saw the bobbing light of a single lantern. Tertius was moving with a speed that belied his age, guided by the desperation of a man whose life's work was turning to ash. The tunnel sloped sharply downward, the air growing colder and smelling of the river. Marcus realized where they were going. This wasn't just a palace exit. It was an ancient passage that led to the Velabrum, the marshy valley between the hills. If Tertius reached the crowded streets near the docks, he could disappear into the thousands of nameless souls that kept Rome breathing. "Stop, Tertius!" Marcus yelled, his boots splashing through pools of stagnant water. The old man turned for a second, his face illuminated by the lantern. He looked less like a master of scales and more like a panicked rat. He didn't say a word. He simply threw the lantern at the wooden supports of the tunnel ceiling and disappeared around a corner. The dry timber caught instantly. Marcus was faced with a choice: navigate the fire or let the master of scales vanish forever. The wooden supports groaned as the fire took hold, the ancient cedar beams hissing and popping in the damp air. Marcus stood before the wall of flame, the heat stinging his eyes. If the roof collapsed, he would be buried beneath tons of Palatine stone, another nameless skeleton in the foundations of the empire. But if he turned back, the man who had orchestrated the death of his friend and the betrayal of the state would walk free. Marcus pulled the hem of his cloak over his mouth and nose. He didn't run. He moved with the measured, terrifying focus of a man who had walked through the burning forests of the north. He stayed low, beneath the thickest plumes of black smoke, and dashed through the gap between two flaming pillars just as the first beam snapped. The world behind him vanished in a roar of dust and falling rock. The tunnel entrance was sealed. He was trapped in the dark passage ahead, but he was still on Tertius's heels. He emerged into a small, circular chamber where the air was suddenly fresh. High above, a vertical shaft allowed a sliver of moonlight to reach the floor. He saw the iron ladder Tertius had used, the rungs still vibrating. Marcus climbed, his hands slipping on the cold metal, until he pushed through a heavy bronze grate and found himself in the shadows of the Forum Boreum, the cattle market near the river. The market was quiet at this hour, filled with the ghostly shapes of empty pens and the smell of hay and manure. But the silence was broken by the frantic clatter of a cart. Marcus looked toward the river. A small, two-wheeled chariot, usually used by palace couriers, was tearing down the narrow street toward the Pont Sublicius, the oldest bridge in Rome. Tertius was at the reins, his grey hair whipping in the wind. He wasn't heading for the docks. He was heading for the Trans-Tiberim district, a labyrinth of foreign quarters and hidden warehouses where a man with enough gold could hide for a lifetime. "Not today," Marcus hissed. He spotted a tethered horse near a baker's stall, still saddled from a late delivery. He sliced the rope with his gladius, leaped onto the animal's back, and kicked it into a gallop. The horse, startled and strong, surged forward. The chase moved through the heart of the old city. The chariot bounced violently over the uneven basalt paving stones of the Via Sacra. Tertius looked back, his eyes widening as he saw the dark shape of the rider closing the distance. He lashed the horses, the chariot swerving dangerously near the stone columns of the temples. They reached the bridge. The wooden planks of the Sublicius rattled like drums under the weight of the pursuit. The Tiber rushed beneath them, a black ribbon of cold death. Halfway across, Tertius realized he couldn't outrun a single horse on a narrow bridge. He pulled the reins sharply, intending to tip the chariot over and block the path. But the momentum was too great. The chariot skidded, one wheel striking the heavy timber railing. It shattered. The chariot flipped, throwing Tertius across the planks. The horses, freed from their burden, galloped toward the far bank. Marcus brought his horse to a sliding halt. He dismounted, his sword drawn, as Tertius struggled to crawl toward the edge of the bridge. The old man's cloak was torn, and his face was smeared with blood and dirt. He reached into his belt, but not for a weapon. He pulled out the heavy bronze weight, the symbol of his power. "You can't stop the weight of history, Marcus." Tertius gasped, clutching the bronze to his chest. "I am only one scale." The other is already falling. The wind howled over the wooden planks of the Pont Sublicious, carrying the scent of salt and the distant roar of the city. Marcus stood over Tertius, his shadow long and jagged under the moonlight. The Master of Scales was no longer the architect of an empire. He was a broken old man, clutching a piece of bronze as if it could keep him anchored to the world he had tried to destroy. "History isn't a weight, Tertius," Marcus said, his voice flat and hard. "It's a record of men. Men like Senator Quintus, who believed in something better than a ledger. And men like you, who think everything has a price." Tertius laughed. He pulled himself up against the railing, the river rushing directly behind him. "Quintus was a fool. He died for a statue. Do you know what the golden eagle really is, Marcus? It's a hollow bird, just like Rome. Beautiful on the outside, but empty. I was going to fill it with a new kind of power, the only power that doesn't rot. Gold rots the soul faster than anything else." Marcus replied. He took a step forward. "Give me the weight." The Emperor wants the Master of Scales brought back to the Forum in chains. He wants the people to see the face of the man who tried to starve them. Tertius looked down at the bronze weight in his hand, then at the black water of the Tiber. A strange, serene look came over his face. The people only care about who gives them the most bread. They don't care about the face of the hand that feeds them. They won't see me in chains, Marcus. I was never meant for the dust of the streets. With a sudden, surprising burst of energy, Tertius pushed himself off the railing. He didn't jump with a scream. He fell back into the darkness like a stone. Marcus lunged, his hand closing on the hem of the old man's cloak, but the fabric was old and brittle. It tore, and Tertius vanished into the swirling, icy depths of the river. Marcus leaned over the edge, his lungs burning. He waited for a splash, for a head to surface, for any sign of the man. But the Tiber was greedy tonight. The weight Tertius held was enough to ensure he would never rise again. The Master of Scales had made his final entry, balancing his life against his secrets. He stood on the bridge for a long time, the torn piece of the cloak flapping in his hand. The silence was absolute. The chase was over. The conspiracy of the snake had been severed from its head, and the gold lay at the bottom of the sea, while its architect lay at the bottom of the river. As the first hint of grey light began to touch the horizon, Marcus looked toward the Palatine. The city was waking up. Smoke from 1,000 breakfast fires began to rise into the sky. Life would go on. The merchants would open their stalls, the soldiers would march, and the emperor would continue to dream of a city of philosophers. Marcus turned and walked back toward the city, leading his horse by the reins. He felt older than he had a week ago, his body a map of scars and bruises. He had saved the eagle, and perhaps he had saved Rome, but the cost was etched into his soul. The city was bathed in a pale, amber glow as Marcus returned to the ruins of the senator's villa. The Praetorian guards had long since finished their investigation, and the house was silent, save for the wind whistling through the charred remains of the atrium. Marcus didn't come to mourn. He came because of a final, cryptic note he had found tucked inside the hem of the cloak scrap he had salvaged from the bridge. "The eagle's nest is deeper than the sky." Livia was already there, standing by the headless statue of her ancestor. She had changed into a simple black stola, her hair tied back in a severe knot. She looked at Marcus, her eyes scanning his fresh wounds with a mixture of pity and steel. The Tiber didn't give him back, Marcus said, answering the question she hadn't asked. Tertius is gone, and he took his final ledgers with him. "Then it's over?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Not quite," Marcus replied. He walked to the center of the atrium, where a large mosaic of a hunting scene decorated the floor. He knelt, tracing the outline of a hound's head. "Your father wasn't just a debtor, Livia. He was a protector. He knew the treasury was being looted, and he knew he couldn't trust the palace. He hid something here, something more than the golden eagle. He signaled to Varro, who had followed him with a heavy iron crowbar. Together, they pried up the central tile of the mosaic. Beneath it lay not dirt, but a slab of polished basalt. When they heaved it aside, a narrow staircase spiraled into the darkness. They descended with a single torch. At the bottom was a small, dry room. It wasn't filled with gold or jewels. Instead, it was filled with thousands of small, wax-sealed scrolls, the private correspondence of every senator who had ever dealt with the Societas Serpentis. "This is it," Marcus whispered, his voice filled with awe. "This is the real weight. Not the gold, but the evidence. Every bribe, every threat, every secret debt. My father didn't just find the snake, he mapped its entire nest." Livia picked up a scroll. It bore the seal of Senator Falco. As she read, her face hardened. They didn't just want money. They wanted to replace the law with their own interests. My father was holding this back, waiting for the right moment to present it to the Emperor. That's why they had to kill him so publicly, to make sure no one else dared to hold the evidence. Marcus looked around the room. In the corner, sitting on a simple wooden stand, was a small, silver replica of the golden eagle. It was a token of the senator's true loyalty. Beside it lay a letter addressed to Marcus. "To the soldier who finds this, do not seek vengeance in the blade. Seek it in the light. Rome lives as long as its secrets are known by the just." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The mystery of why the senator had reached out to a common investigator was solved. Quintus hadn't wanted a bodyguard. He had wanted a witness. A man who knew the grit of the streets and the honor of the shield. "What do we do with all this?" Livia asked, looking at the thousands of scrolls. "We take them to the Emperor," Marcus said. "But first, we make copies. Rome has a short memory, Livia. We need to make sure these names are never forgotten." The transition from the darkness of the subterranean vault to the brilliance of the midday sun was a metaphor for the transformation of Rome itself. For 3 days, the city watched in stunned silence as the urban cohorts, acting on the direct orders of the emperor and the evidence from the senator's scrolls, conducted a systematic purge of the Societas Serpentis. Marcus stood on the balcony of the tabularium, watching as wagons loaded with seized property and shackled men moved through the forum. The list of the fallen was a litany of Rome's elite. Senator Falco, found hiding in a wine cellar, was led away in iron. Dozens of minor officials, tax collectors, and even a few decorated centurions were stripped of their ranks. The snake was being decapitated, one head at a time. The emperor had not chosen the path of secret executions. Instead, he had ordered the records to be read aloud in the forum by the public heralds. The people needed to see the numbers, to understand how their bread had been stolen and their coins hollowed out. It was a brutal, honest accounting that the city had not seen in a generation. In the private halls of the palace, the emperor summoned Marcus one final time. The room was no longer filled with the tension of a looming coup. It felt quieter, though perhaps a bit emptier. "You have given me a difficult gift, Marcus," the emperor said, looking at the last of the copied scrolls. "You have shown me that the empire I rule is built on a foundation of rot. To fix it, I must tear down half of what I thought was stable. A surgeon must cut to save the patient, Caesar." Marcus replied. He was dressed in a clean, simple toga, his sword left at the entrance. He looked less like a soldier and more like the man Senator Quintus had envisioned. "The northern legions are being restructured," the emperor continued. "The gold you sank was a blow, but the truth was the killing strike. When the soldiers learned their bonus was coming from the starvation of their own families in Rome, their loyalty returned to the throne. The Rhine is secure." The emperor walked over to Marcus and placed a heavy signet ring on the table. It bore the image of an owl, the symbol of wisdom and watchful eyes. I have a need for a man who can see through the shadows without being consumed by them. The emperor said, I am establishing the Officium Speculorum, the office of the Watchers. You will not be a soldier, and you will not be a spy. You will be the man who ensures the scales remain balanced. You will report directly to me. Marcus looked at the ring. It was an offer of power, wealth, and a life far removed from the muddy trenches of Gaul. But he thought of the silence of the senator's house and the cold water of the Tiber. I am a man of the streets, Caesar. Marcus said quietly, if I sit in a palace office, I will lose the very sight you value. Let me remain among the people. Let me be the one who listens when the senators are silent. The emperor smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Then you shall be my eyes in the Subura. You will have my seal, and you will have the resources of the state, but you will keep your boots in the dust. Rome needs a man who knows the price of bread as well as the price of a soul. A month had passed since the waters of the Tiber had claimed the master of scales. The smoke of the Great Purge had cleared, replaced by the mundane, comforting smells of freshly baked bread and the sawdust of construction. Rome was a city that moved on. It had to. The gaps in the Senate were filled by new men. The mint was producing coins of solid silver once more, and the story of the snake in the palace was already becoming a cautionary tale told by mothers to their children. Marcus stood at the entrance of the house of Quintus. The villa was no longer a scorched skeleton. Scaffolding climbed the marble walls, and the rhythmic of stonemasons' hammers filled the air. The emperor had granted Livia the funds to restore her ancestral home, declaring that the honor of the house was a public treasure. Livia emerged from the atrium. She was dressed in a gown of deep blue, the color of a clear Roman sky. She looked younger, the shadows of grief and fear finally receding from her face. She walked to where Marcus stood and placed a hand on the newly carved doorframe. They found the last of the stolen silver. She said, the warehouses near the docks were full of it. It seems Tertius was more of a hoarder than even the emperor suspected. He wanted to own the future. Marcus said, looking at the bustling street beyond the villa. But the future belongs to no one man. My father's name is etched into the rostra now. Livia said softly. The emperor spoke of him as the man who saved the currency. He would have hated the attention, but he would have loved the results. She turned to Marcus, her gaze searching. And what about you, Marcus? I see you are still wearing the same worn tunic. The emperor's ring is in your pouch. Yet you spend your nights in the taverns of the Subura and your days in the markets. Marcus smiled. It was a tired but satisfied expression. I found out that I am not very good at being a statue, Livia. I prefer to be the man who notices when a statue is missing. The emperor's seal gives me the right to ask questions, but the streets give me the answers. The city is safer with you watching. She said. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small object. It was a coin, a perfect, heavy silver denarius, freshly minted. A gift from the first batch, to remind you that some things are worth their weight. Marcus took the coin, flipping it into the air and catching it with a practiced motion. I'll keep it close. It's the only gold, or silver, I've ever earned that didn't come with a bloodstain. They stood in silence for a moment, two survivors of a storm that had almost drowned an empire. The Golden Eagle, now safely housed in the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline, seemed to cast a long, protective shadow over the valley below. The statue was no longer a target. It was once again a symbol. Goodbye, Marcus. Livia said, leaning forward to kiss his cheek. If you ever find yourself tired of the dust, there will always be a place for you at this table. I'll remember that. Marcus replied. He turned and walked away from the villa, heading down toward the crowded heart of the city. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden fingers across the rooftops, Marcus adjusted his cloak. He had no destination in mind, only the rhythm of the city and the watchful eye he had promised to keep. The investigation of the Golden Eagle was over, but Rome was a city of a million secrets, and Marcus was finally the man he was meant to be. He disappeared into the gathering shadows of the Subura, a ghost with a badge, a soldier without a legion, and the first watcher of Rome.